Short preamble. To an extent, I no longer find the energy to edit long-form content to a great degree. I have a full-time job and other outlets for my creative efforts. This video brought to you by Manamania. Because of the scope of this topic, this will be a bare-bones video production. There will be discussions of religious and political themes, because there need to be. You'll probably disagree with me at some point, but that's okay. Keep watching anyways. Alright, let's go. The Oh-Hellos make fantastic music. It's good stuff, very catchy, varied in mood and form, and it has quite a lot to bite into in terms of the lyrics, especially given their frequently religious subject matters. But theology is complicated, and I'm somewhat obligated to ask myself if my favorite band is consistent with what I value as a man of faith. If you don't know, and I'll just lift this from Wikipedia, the Oh-Hellos are an American indie folk rock duo formed in 2011 in San Marcos, Texas, consisting of siblings Tyler and Maggie Heath. They remain an independent band with 8 releases: the Oh-Hellos, Through the Deep Dark Valley, Dear Wormwood, Notos, Eurus, Boreas, and Zephyrus, as well as 2 Christmas EPs, the Oh-Hello Family Christmas Albums 1 and 2, not counting re-releases, remasters, and anniversary editions. When playing live, Maggie and Tyler are often joined by a large ensemble of musicians as their backing band. The Heath siblings write their own lyrics and draw significantly from their experience as Christians to do so. Greek mythology and writers like Neil Gaiman and C.S. Lewis are also heavy influences. The prevalence of these religious motifs in their songs leads some to refer to them as a Christian band, but this is a label they've pushed away from in the past. In a 2016 interview with Westword, they claimed that they never pinned themselves as making Christian music in an effort to avoid alienating audiences with the connotations associated with such music. They often questioned their faith growing up, and their songs were meant to express their personal beliefs in a way that could resonate with anyone. Now, I will not claim to be an arbiter of what the Oh-Hellos believe, but I will attempt to accurately represent their thoughts and opinions by interpreting their music and referencing other available media. And I'll probably get some things wrong. But after listening to them for a few years, I know what vibe I get from them, you know? The Oh-Hellos are not the proselytizing sort of Christian. They don't present a definitive vision of Christ and his people as much as they reference notions of his teaching from their own personal experiences. They're not spreading the word to deepen the faith of others, they're retelling their own struggles with faith in a way that they hope others will relate to, mostly ambivalent of the direction that pushes listeners in. They're not taking responsibility for walking outside audiences through the complexities of the church and its followers. These albums are meant to portray a particular set of concepts from a particular set of perspectives and leave the rest to interpretation. They're not arbiters of Christianity, and neither am I. I'm an engineer, not a theologian. However, I'm still a Catholic, and spreading the faith on some level matters, so what interests me in the particular scope of this topic is whether or not their music is effective in guiding non-believers to Christ. Maybe more pressingly, whether it is effective in helping those who are already questioning their faith in resolving their inner conflicts in any way, but also in a way that keeps them within the church, which is what I want to talk about. Even if that particular frame of reference is not of note to you, there's still a lot to dive into with these albums, and you might find it worthwhile to stick around. I believe their 4-album anthology, The Anemoi, most closely touches this topic, and so I'll be providing a complete breakdown of everything contained within it. I'll run us through the albums in order, dissecting each lyric, bringing in context, and discussing possible interpretations. In combination with my own experiences with crises of faith, this will hopefully culminate in a stronger understanding of the deeper lessons to be gleaned from the anthology, intended or unintended. This is working title, Faith Against the Crosswinds, the Oh-Hellos, the Anemoi, and American Christianity. Thematically, this series asks the question, where did our ideas come from? Notos recounts a time when the duo wasn't even aware that there was a question to ask, and reflects on the backfire effect we experience when confronted with new information for the first time. Notos begins our journey in the summer, a time of fond childhood memories and persistent nostalgia. The world comes to a slow crawl of humidity, heat, hikes through the wilderness, starry nights, and escapes to the cool waters of a still lakefront. It seems like the way things should be, but some buzzing gnat is swiping at your ear, like a persistent thought that takes you away from the moment. For this reason, the cover of the album is an insect, likely a cicada. Cicadas spend years burrowed underground, hidden away from the outside world, only to emerge in the warmth of the mid-year to begin their cycle anew. In this way, they represent cycles of stagnation and rebirth, something entirely relevant to this series of albums. The Anemoi, the four Greek spirits of the wind, are Notos, Eurus, Boreas, and Zephyrus, south, east, north, and west. They are not purely signifiers of the weather, but of the passing of the year, transitions from one season into the next, from one phase of life into another. The Anemoi albums, in turn, tell the story of one's own transition of faith, a sequence of periods where they question all that they have ever known and overcome the challenges of rectifying their own identity.
On the mountain top, whisper to me words in a voice so small, like the one that to Elijah called, quiet as a candle, bright as the morning sun. Though the fire and wind shouted down the hills with the rage of wind, and the fear that shook the firmament, he was not within them, the clatter of brass and drums.
In Kings 1, chapter 19, Elijah had fled into the wilderness. Collapsing under a desert brush, he wished for death, claiming that he was no better than his ancestors. He was visited twice by an angel of the Lord, who fed him and gave him energy to walk for another 40 days and 40 nights to Mount Horeb. Taking refuge in a cave, the Spirit of the Lord called him outside. He witnessed a great storm and an earthquake and a raging fire, which shattered the mountains in succession and rattled him. But the Lord was not in this violence. At last, Elijah heard a whisper, and the Lord said to him, "What are you doing here, Elijah?" You see, the followers of Baal had taken command of Israel, and the other prophets of his time had been slaughtered in the masses. But what Elijah did by running away wasn't helping. His purpose was greater than to save himself by hiding in the wilderness. So, the Lord sent Elijah back, and had him anoint new prophets, so that those still loyal in Israel might yet be saved. Kings 1 and 2 tell a broader story of how poor leadership turning people away from their faith led to a decline of the once great kingdom of Israel. The Oholos begin the first song of this album with a moment where God revealed the calmness of his being, and how it exists in spite of the destructive chaos that might surround us. The inclusion of that clatter of brass and drums accompanies later mentions of holy war to allude to periods where Christianity abandoned that calm peace to become loud and large and violent. They're saying that God's will was not within these actions. Despite his absence, this boisterous version of Christianity is presented as a sort of norm, implying that the modern faith has left its roots and pursued a more vicious and vindictive path. The narrator of the song continues with,
I know you want me to be afraid. I know you want me to love you.
In this, the narrator reflects what they have been taught, that they should be God-fearing, and fearing him is how they express the love that he desires. These notions will be challenged throughout this album. That frightening vision of God continues by referring to the Holy Spirit as an angry ghost, and the wind that once shook Elijah is now blowing forth from an empty grave, presumably left by Christ. Notice all three parts of the Trinity being referenced here. This is a God of fire and brimstone, contrasted to the one of quiet voice. In the following line, firing bricks from broken cannon is meant to invoke the violence of a cannon in battle, but doubly refers to the action of firing a brick in a kiln to harden it. Canon and prose obviously refers to the Bible and biblical canon. But what are all of these bricks for? Building a wall. Dividing people. We get a reference to the Tower of Babel thereafter, an event where the Lord did divide the world with language as a form of punishment for humanity's hubris. Together, this paints an image where the wind that God is falsely presumed to exist within is used alongside misinterpretation of the scripture to fuel a fire that enables further division. The metaphor of fire as being false reflection or distortion of God is something we'll see often, contrasted by the Lord mere truly existing with a softer ember or candle, or, on the opposite scale, with the full intensity of the sun. We follow this with a repetition of the chorus, reinforcing this idea that God desires this contemporary vision of fear-mongering followers.
Still you beat your drum, racing holy war with every strum, shouting down the quiet kingdom come, brushing at your fingers, hoping you'll come around.
And despite how modern Christians are depicted to enable holy war and division, the quiet kingdom of heaven is still waiting. It brushes against you calmly, in hopes you'll stop to see the error. In the story of Elijah, it is members of the Israelites, God's chosen people, who fall to follow Baal and leave the true path of the scripture. This could be read in two adjacent ways. As the song primarily presents, with Christians misinterpreting their relationship to God and the world at large to sow division and self-righteousness. Or, of equal importance, God's followers being corrupted by the people of the world to abandon his path and worship false idols. It was foreign powers who overtook Israel and killed its prophets. There's culpability to be placed on believers and non-believers alike for this discord. Something to remember going into our next song.
I got a venom like a snake running out of my mouth, running out of my mouth, running out of my mouth. It's got you burning at the stake. Innocent or not, you're not a bet I care to take. And for the ignorance will make brothers of us all, brothers of us all, brothers of us all. As he sets our torch aflame, chasing down the flames, these specters that we co-create.
Torches is a song about the fear of the unknown. Its title is a reference to violent mobs with torches and pitchforks, a time-honored tradition of communities around the globe. In Christian history, you might recall the witch hunts, where men and women were often tortured or burned at the stake. Their punishments would come in response to flimsy allegations, made either by malicious parties with personal grudges, or by those who were often fearful of a perceived threat and mistakenly accused the victim. As James chapter 3 verse 8 says, "But no one can tame the tongue. It is a restless evil and full of deadly poison. The words we say have great power over others, and when rumors spread that demons and specters are about, someone is bound to get burned." Regardless of innocence, we'd rather unite in ignorance against imagined ghosts in the night than risk trusting the unknown.
Over and over again, we keep that old wheel turning. We spin it around.
Torches presents this consistent human behavior as returning over and over again, like a wheel turning around. We keep feeding into the same prejudices that have caused pain and distrust in the past. That fiery imitation of God's will continues to claim casualties.
I got a terror I can't shake, pushing down my lungs, pushing down my lungs, pushing down my lungs. It's got me lying there awake with a hand on the gun, turning shadows into shapes. Mother Fortuna, oh she makes sisters of us all, sisters of us all, sisters of us all. When faces in her way look more like our own than the effigies we emulate.
The second verse continues with another depiction of overreaction to imagined fears, seeing shapes in the shadows that leave us scrambling for breath. Where it takes a turn is in referencing the Roman goddess of Fortuna, of chance and luck. These fearful reactions often result from unfortunate coincidences, rendering us equally likely to fall victim to a perceived threat, over time forming into attitudes of tribalism. Again, the faces in her wake, the people affected, are more alike us than the monsters that we build up and burn down. I think we can all remember experiences where we saw someone punished for their differences, despite how much they might have had in common with the punishers. Despite this, I'll play the devil's advocate that sometimes there really is a threat in the night. What may initially seem like minor personal differences may be reflective of underlying and incompatible differences in worldview. Where 20th century Christians were told to abandon that strong in-group preference in favor of a live and let live approach to outside doctrines, the last few decades have revealed how ignoring those differences can end up creating more friction than if they were just acknowledged, adjusted for, and warded against. Sometimes, different groups of people just can't get along, no matter how much they might seem to have in common. You can't talk out every problem. Fearful reactions of the unfamiliar can be sensible ones.
Over and over again, we keep that old wheel turning. Over and over again, we lay the next spoke down. Over and over again, oceans will roll in. Over and over again.
The chorus repeats our previous assertion of this conflict's cyclical nature before finishing out the song with some delightful instrumentation. The mention that oceans will roll in is curious, because we've not yet established the meaning of ocean in our metaphorical language. As we'll see in the future, it might represent nature. It's omnipresent, but divided from us, and way more powerful.
I can feel it on my tongue. Brick and mortar, thick as scripture, drawing lines in the sand and laying borders. As tall as towers, I babble on until my voice is gone.
Constellations builds on themes established in the prior two songs, referencing tongues, bricks, scripture, and of course, the Tower of Babel, here hidden in the phrase Babel on. The tower, of course, is said to have caused the language divide when God divided the voice of the people into different tongues as punishment for its construction. Here, that's used to show the narrator talking a lot without actually meaning much. Similarly, lines in the sand are compared to borders, drawing equivalency of their seeming importance to the world, but ultimate irrelevancy in the eyes of God. Now, on some level, I believe national integrity is important for the preservation of the church, but I do get what they're going for.
This hill I'll die on is about 90 meters of bricks, colored indigo and inscribed with my name and lined with cedar. But the words fall flat like cymbals crashing, like molars gnashing.
Cleverly using the idiom of "I'll die on this hill," the Oh Hellos highlight the narrator's dependence on their worldview by comparing it to both the Tower of Babel and the larger city of Babylon itself. Sources estimate the Tower of Babel's height at anywhere from 211 meters to 13 kilometers. However, the fantastic walls of Babylon were described as about 90 meters tall. Indigo and cedar are a color and wood strongly associated with tradition and spiritual strength, with the Ishtar Gate to Babylon being colored a brilliant hue from the lapis lazuli adorning its bricks. Ishtar is the Babylonian goddess of love, sex, and war, by the way. These allusions to one of the most beautiful cities to have ever existed serves to illustrate the grandiosity and importance ascribed to this version of the church by its followers, while simultaneously invoking the story of its downfall to foreshadow the downward spiral of the narrator. The hill being inscribed with their name invokes a gravestone, furthering the idiom and how the narrator would feel lost or dead without the guidance of religious canon. Sort of like Elijah, lost and fleeing from Israel. However, these sensations all still fall flat because God is not within them. It's not of his will. Corinthians chapter 13 says, "If I speak in the tongues of men and angels, but have not love, I am a noisy gong or a clanging cymbal," with some sources translating that last bit as just bronze. The missing fuel for this metaphorical fire in brick and cannon and clanging is that middle section. Love. These Christians aren't really spreading God's love, which leaves their words empty, falling flat.
It's like constellations, a million years away. Every good intention is interpolation. A line we drew in the array, looking for the faces, looking for the shapes in the silence.
The entire chorus is a metaphor for how people who have good intentions of following God can get caught up in the mechanisms of how that they forget the what for and why. God is notably non-vocal nowadays, feeling a little removed from us at times. Faced with what we might feel are incomplete revelations of his plan, we fill the holes with our own machinations, connecting the dots and looking for that face in the night. This urge is what can lead us down all of those bloody paths from before. The motif of stars and constellations are reflected in the name of the instrumental lead-in, planetarium stickers on a bedroom ceiling. The callback to a common childhood experience shows just how deep these feelings go.
All that's left for me to climb to the heavens is the chasm of the night and the matter of time. That I hear the rumble as the tectonic plates start to shake, and I feel my blood pounding like the beat of a drum.
Returning to Babel, their ascension to heaven seemed so sure that it was only a matter of time before they would reach it. Nothing could assuage them otherwise. But like new information that can usurp a person's entire perspective, God sent a great earthquake to shatter the tower, an ironic inverse of the story of Elijah on the Mount. The ground beneath the narrator's feet has shifted, and they feel the effects of that mongering perspective more closely than ever before, realizing a discontinuity.
It's like constellations, a million years away. Every good intention is interpolation. A line we drew in the array, clinging to the faces, clinging to the shapes in the silence. Like constellations, you're floating in the night. Everything is turning, everything is turning. The shapes that you do, they change the game, the different light. Everything you thought you knew, fall apart, but you'll be alright.
Like the turning of the sky throughout the year, like the expansion of the universe across millions of light years, like shadows changing shape under shifting light, Our perspective of things can change. Sometimes it all falls apart, but that's okay. Constellations is here as the first step of a journey of saying what I knew was wrong, but I am going to be fine. That will last the rest of the anthology. But if Mountain Tall and Torches were an establishing shot, the prologue, the background information, and Constellations was the inciting event, then Notos is not only one of my favorite songs, but the immediate fallout of that event.
There's an eerie quiet on the southern levees. The halcyon sky, atmosphere gone heavy. There's a wind rising with the hour of Venus, taking at the surface of the seas between us, and it's catalyzing with a breath of califaction, thunderous disturbance for every action, a reaction.
The halcyon was a mythical bird said to nest on the icy sea, but the word halcyon has come to mean nostalgic, referring to an idyllic version of the past. A halcyon sky is tranquil, but here the atmosphere is darkening and growing heavy. The wind that once stoked the narrator's fires now carries the ire of Venus, or the anger of forgotten love, and all of the consequences of forgetting it. As this new realization from Constellations tugs at the narrator, a metaphorical sea that once divided them from the other has grown startlingly narrow, and threatens to pull them in. The gap is shrinking, and there will be overflow. Califaction is the process of being heated or warmed, as these events are catalyzing or triggering a new breath of life in the narrator through the warm summer winds. This disturbance feels like a bombshell, as a lifetime of going in the wrong direction culminates in a sudden reaction. The narrator is swept up in all of this personal revelation, drowning in the inescapable immensity of the wrongs they committed and allowed to persist. These things are lost to the winds of Notos, the warm southern wind, and a stand-in for the forces of wind and fire and earthquakes and war that we saw in the beginning of On the Mountain Tall. The Lord is not within them, but now the narrator is.
But the water's rising, light and sound, the seas within me, coming up from the ground. I try to fight it, I drain completely, cover the sun and drown it out.
Verse 2 continues the narrator's breakdown/immersion into this revelation. Depictions of stormy clouds and rising waters not only block out their ability to connect with their prior worldview, but in blocking out the sun, also disconnect them from the feeling of true warmth of God. Everything that follows is successfully more and more overwhelming as they realize what they've done and let that rapidly spiral.
Every inhale I take swallows the ocean whole, and I am one with the hurricane. Tall as the tide that laps with a rabbit tongue. Every exhale I break, get down with the fury I lay the hills undone, like a dog on untamed, billowing out a river from my lungs. And the rush will take you away, like
That verse and chorus are a crescendo, a massive building and release of tension that blows me away every time. Listening to it, I feel equally as swept up in its wake as the narrator, caught in the undertow, bellowing out the lyrics like a bubbling river from my throat. The words are evocative and powerful, and some of Theohalo's best work, IMO. At least in this anthology. As the storm comes to a brief calm after its build, we find ourselves within the eye of the hurricane. At least that's how I interpret this respite between moments of high tension in both parts of the song. The narrator has no one to blame but themselves for going along for so long, and that profound anger and grief has overtaken them completely in this moment. But right at its apex, there's a single line that shakes them loose. You've gotta let go. Of the rage, of the anger, of what you've done, of the self-blame. That's the ultimate message the narrator must discover for themselves in the rest of the anthology. How to let go. They're able to, here, only for a moment, but that storm swiftly swells within them once again. Quieter this time, wordless, but just as powerful. I used to live on the East Coast, and I vividly remember hurricane season. You can feel it come on for some time, but when it hits, it drowns out all of your sensations. All around you is an unparalleled volley of wind and water that rips trees from their roots and threatens to flatten you despite all preparation. Tyler and Maggie Heath experienced the might of Texan Gulf storms. They know this feeling as well as I do. In mandatory evac, rising tension is barometric pressure. Plucked strings are flailing, snapped power lines and Category 5 winds, and each note is a lightning strike. Only when the storm has passed can you come out from your cave to see the new world around you. The old one is gone. You can't go back now. Erosion is a process that can wear down almost any feature of the Earth into sand, silt, and canyon valleys, given enough time. In the same way, the monolithic tradition that had captured the mind of the narrator can be, and was eventually broken down by the cycle of engaging with new and contradictory information. It takes time, but each day reveals a small piece broken off, a part of the lie realized and abandoned.
It took forever and a day for the canyons and coasts to erode away. By the weight of the ocean's cyclical motion, they sway. And though the aeons may pass as slow as the sands of an hourglass, every grain we counted claims that even the mountains can change.
In the Anemoi, mountains and rocky features are symbolic of stubborn tradition, of old doctrine and set ways. A persistent motif is carving away at them or causing them to move. The beginning of that process is seen in the Notos album.
Let it come down, let it come down, let it make a new honey river. Let it come down, let it come down, let it make a new honey river.
The chorus of New River is somewhat reminiscent of a prayer for rain. Rain has typically been seen as an agent of renewal, enabling the growth of crops and for new life to emerge. At the same time, it is a powerful force of destruction that wipes away the old, swiftly in the form of floods and waves, but steadily as that same force of erosion.
I know the winds from the south have the waves riled up like a hungry mouth, and your stomach goes hollow with the thought that it could swallow you whole. Well, it rains for 40 days.
Again, that south wind, Notos, threatens to swallow the narrator, like a guilty thought on the edge of their mind. The thought of it returning in full force is still nauseating, and the rain serves as a reminder that this storm will inevitably come again. But you can prepare for it. The story of Noah is used as a reflection of that of Elijah, where one fled to the dryness of the desert for 40 days to escape death and found God. The other was found by God and escaped death in the 40 days of rain that followed. In both stories, the experience brought a great renewal. Elijah's crisis of faith about his own worthiness foreshadows the narrator's journey to come, while Noah's strength and resolve in the face of impending disaster demonstrates where the narrator, and we, may ultimately find ourselves at this anthology's conclusion. The river takes her shape from every tempest she abides, swirling and bending with the overflow. The change is continuous and always will be. Stagnation means death for fresh water. The only thing to do is pray for the rain to make you new again. And as the last song of the album leads out, the chants and humming are a reminder of all that we have yet to change. Change is the cornerstone of Eurus, displaying motifs of the autumnal transition from one season to the next. Like the arrival of harvest, our narrator would now come to reap what they have sown with their past, exploring the logical conclusions of their previous worldviews. The fruits of their labor, if you will. And like Halloween night or Dia de los Muertos, the spirits of old forgotten things arise to haunt us. On the cover, a goose or passerine fowl takes flight in an act of migration. Another symbol of change.
While the weary nations weep, awakening me from a dream.
The Eurus album retains its focus on the end of Notos, with the flood that washed away the narrator's beliefs for their renewal. The first line references their awakening in the wake of their suffering they witnessed and or inadvertently caused. In fact, the title, O Sleeper, is a reference to Ephesians chapter 5, verse 14. Awake, O sleeper, and rise from the dead, and Christ will give you light. The verse is a call from God to Christians to follow him in his light. Where once we were spiritually asleep, or at least in the bondage of the temporal sleep of death, Christ's light shines upon us and grants us new life. Even modern Christians can experience spiritual death in their lives, moving away from God. However, confession and acknowledgement of sin and submission to the Holy Spirit can restore our communion.
I see the moonlight steal across my sheets. My love is lying fast asleep, chasing its beam. She stirs and then she turns her back to me.
The role of moonlight within the Anemoi series has very much to do with its nature as reflected sunlight, maintaining the metaphor of God as the sun, no, not God as the sun, Jesus Christ, God as the solar star. Any object which reflects the sun is imitating it in a way, or maybe in a roundabout way acting as a vessel for that light to reach a place it normally wouldn't. I feel that the former reading applies here more, with the moonlight sneaking across the narrator's bed. The love, which may represent the doctrine the narrator was raised in, or a literal romantic partner involved in the same system, is chasing those reflections while still asleep, not realizing the situation. They're after a pale imitation, rather than the genuine article. This is more flood imagery, with the clouds opening up to release the rain that will fill the valleys. Laying low the hills is indicative of the other destructive forces God leveraged against man thus far. However, note that the Oholos call out that this occurs for the wicked and the just all the same. It's a level of indifference in God's actions towards the behavior of mankind. Yes, good people suffer tragic losses as much or even more than bad people, but it's curious that this is highlighted in this way, when we just spent an album talking about events where specifically persecutors and sinners were punished. Maybe we're supposed to separate the rain from the flood. Upon closer inspection, this line and song as a whole appears to be a reference to Matthew 5:45. That you may be children of your Father in heaven. He causes the sun to rise on the evil and the good, and sends rain on the just and the unjust. The passage is saying that we are all children of God, despite our actions, and he still sends blessings to all of us. The clouds opening up reveals a second meaning, not just opening to release a downpour, which itself is a punishment and renewal, but clearing a way to let the sun shine through. But even then, the next line doubles back to show how the scorching sun can be a punishment as well.
But like the sun that turns the sky, illuminating all in time, the tables in the temple will be turned on their side, just as it scorches up the dunes beneath the height of noon. The pillars of the empire will be burned in kind.
They say that sunlight is the best disinfectant. The story of Jesus casting out the moneylenders from the temple is integral in understanding how far the Hebrew faith had fallen in this time, and the dire need for the old temple to be torn down. Jesus did this, of course. He metaphorically cast it down and rebuilt it in 3 days with his resurrection. That's why Judaism lost its legitimacy, the advent of Christianity. But where Christ once destroyed the old church for becoming a corrupt society of rule worshippers that marred his father's house, the Oholos are now using that same story to allude to the current church. And that's what the album Eurus is about. If Notos is a recognition that we're not doing things right, Eurus is identifying where we got off track. We'll talk about this more in the titular song of the album.
And by the holy rock I stand, as blessed as the sacred ram. I see the trail short as I've climbed over, but by God I'll play up my hands with everything I am to cut away the mountains I've made and fill the dales below.
The Holy Rock refers to Christianity's founding. Where Jesus, Lamb of God, once sacrificed himself for our sins, the narrator now stands ready to take on that messianic role and sacrifice themselves to a new cause. They see now the shoulders of the giants they've stood on, and they're going to continue the work. However, Jesus already made a sacrifice for our sins, and though we are called to be like him, to what extent must we destroy or punish ourselves to do so? We can't hope to match him. He was God incarnate. So how bloody will our hands get before we reach another breaking point? O Sleeper ends with a declaration from the narrator of their intention with this renewed worldview, to clean up the mess they've made, to right themselves by cutting away the nonsense from the old mountain that is tradition and fill the dale below, be it with drowning currents or scorching rays.
Between the seams that line your living room, the vine of life is pushing her way through. And as she creeps along, she sinks her roots into the cracks to pull them back until the structure's coming loose.
A secondary theme of the Anemoi is separation of man from nature, the suppression of natural urges and emotions by societal confines. You can see this in the language used in Notos, where the emotional climax of the album sees the narrator merging with the oceanic forces overwhelming them. Grow and dry branches are primarily within this domain, describing the re-emerging sensations as old thoughts and emotions that the narrator has fought back for years. The vine of ivy represents a sense of childlike wonder, one lost in the rigid confines of institutionalized religion. Despite how much it was maligned, that instinctual curiosity towards the Lord's work will start to poke through when given a chance.
And the way the shadows on the wall are cast look like a twisted apparition from the past. And all the memories come flooding fast. A wilderness you kinda miss, but what's hard, you ought to cut it back.
I suppose I should make a distinction here. I feel like there's been a perspective shift within this song that lasts through the rest of Hieroglyphics. The person previously acting as our narrator is now possibly being addressed in the second person, indicated by the you of these songs being the person undergoing the emotional journey. It could be self-referential, but the almost advice-like nature of these songs leads me to think otherwise. It's not yet clear who is talking, but we'll need to shift our language. I'll call the previous narrator Chris, so we have a random gender-neutral name to identify with. Carrying some of the shadow language over from Torches, we see how the reflection on Chris's misdeeds have also awakened deeper memories of their formative experiences. The wild and untamed zeal that young children have for life reemerges, where once it had been disregarded as purely childish.
So shout it down, it's all I know. You got a lot to learn if you settle down. Let be what is it? It's a natural world in which we're living. If you let it alone, it will surely grow. Just leave it alone, try and let it grow.
But we can see Chris fighting back against these feelings. They've spent so long suppressing them that their knee-jerk reaction is to shut them out again. But the voice presses them to let these feelings back in. They've got a lot to learn, and Chris needs to let things manifest without interruption if they're going to achieve any level of personal growth, a la a farmer not checking their seeds before they sprout.
And when all your cigarettes have crumbled down, and every stone is thrown like seeds across the ground.
This is a further reference to Christ's destruction of the old temple, as well as how Chris's modern church is falling apart in their eyes. A destroyed temple would be scattered to prevent rebuilding, symbolizing the inability for Chris to quietly regress.
A new Arcadia will come around and multiply till the minds of death have been unwound.
Arcadia is the central region of the Peloponnese island and was regarded as an unspoiled wilderness by the Greeks, home of the gods Hermes and Pan. This makes it an area of great freedom and natural beauty, an analog to the Garden of Eden. In our context, casting aside the restrictions of the temple lets the wilderness reclaim its space, growing to set us free and return us to a primeval state reminiscent of the sinless existence in Eden. Hence, the binds of death would not affect us, since we would have to overcome sin to reach this new tranquility. The second chorus establishes a metaphor that will continue in Passerine of Chris being a sort of bird, and also calls back to the song New River. More or less, it's a continuation of the let it go theme of the series. Specifically, let go of the belief that man was ever improving upon nature and natural belief with the structures it built. The ground didn't need to be consecrated because it was always holy, always part of the divine picture. Let the temples fall to ruins and let that primordial divine connection return. In these last two songs, the Oh Hellos appear to take a staunch stance against not just the modern church, but possibly organized religion as a whole, appealing to a more state of nature, one-on-one relationship with God. That sort of Bible first, church second approach is pretty common in Protestant circles. In fact, defining, and something I heavily resist as a Catholic. I'm very integrity-minded, and as easy as it is to point to corruption in the church as a mark against it and for individual worship, there's a multi-millennia debate about whether the average person has the wherewithal to make competent assessments of universal morality from a book magnitudes older than they are. So, while I do agree that we've got a lot of resounding structural issues from mismanagement during at least the 20th and 21st centuries, I'm not ready to abandon Christ's bride and the utility of a centralized church body. But hey, that's just me.
Spinning that stone uphill again, like atonement for a bygone sin. Under the weight of it, my bones are cracking like a dry branch in a westward wind.
In our opening lines of the song Eurus, the Oh Hellos draw a comparison between Sisyphus' eternal punishment on the stone on the hill and the act of trying to atone for a bygone sin. Which sin? Not clear. Maybe all of them? Like I mentioned before, Christ died for our sins, which leads me to think that Eurus the song is trying to say that making atonements for our own personal sins is a little pointless. Spinning the stone reminds me of turning the wheel from that line in Torches, referring to the cycle of violence Chris's society perpetuates. Are they disavowing social notions of perpetual penance, or just penance in general? Are they advocating for a all has already been forgiven worldview? The second line implies our narrator has suffered and is suffering from trying to carry out an impossible act of penance, which is consistent with Chris's goal of atonement for system-wide faults. We'll get to this more in Hieroglyphics. While Dry Branch is clearly a reference to the prior instrumental song of the same name in this album, the westward wind is less certain. Westward means towards the west, and Eurus is the east wind blowing from east to west, making it westward. Eurus itself is a wind associated with destruction of the wicked. It's the east wind that brings locusts to Egypt and then parts the Red Sea. In this reading, the westward wind the narrator is straining against could be the righteous wrath of God, but we previously established that that wind was Notos, right? Or is Notos a wrath falsely perpetuated by his worshippers, those of Chris's doctrine? So it's Chris's struggling to overcome their prior beliefs? But if you take westward as from the west, then it's not Eurus, it's Zephyrus, the wind of spring renewal. That would mean that Chris is fighting against the renewal of their faith by maintaining the practice of atonement, which seems more ideologically consistent with the songs prior to this, but is technically incorrect in its use of westward. I'm left unsure, so we press on.
Zeus and his pantheon of kin take the first 9 out of every 10. Venus like lightning changing hands, it all returns back to his pockets in the end.
To complicate things further, we now throw the Greek pantheon as a collective into the mix. My best reading is that they, being false worldly idols, represent worldly powers and the forces of nature apart from God. After all, they were made when humans assigned personalities to parts of nature, irrespective of the one true Lord. So, in this way, these lines say that the world will claim the majority of what we earn? The fruits of our labor? Money, specifically? Minas are an archaic form of coinage, so the line is pointing to how no matter how often money changes hands in transaction, it all ends up in the hands of the powers that be. Zeus, in this case. So then it's an indictment of capitalism and materialism. Or maybe what they're talking about doesn't matter. The purpose of the line is to state that these forces of nature beyond our control will take what they will, and we can't change that. It's a statement that we can't control fate, which is more consistent with later lines and prior notions from Notos and Grow that certain things are beyond our capacity to influence.
Fingers.
The chorus elaborates on the first interpretation I gave for the prior lines about Zeus and money, running very much counter to the prosperity gospel concept found in some evangelist dogmas. The Oholos stand by the notion that our earthly wealth doesn't make us spiritually wealthy. The point is, despite knowing this, our narrator can't help but chase after worldly pleasures that, due to larger, uncontrollable forces of synthetic gods, slip away from them every time.
As for tuna sits idly by, I spin her wheel with all my might, crushing my kin for warring wage, knitted from the ivory of its youth thigh, under the table where she dines, I sit hungry with my mouth full wide, fighting for crumbs that trickle down. She finishes her cake and takes a bite.
So here's where they really crank up the dial against capitalism, and where I have to not just lean on a limited well of theological knowledge, but of economic theory as well. Now, I know these words are triggering your fight or flight response. I hold a conservative worldview myself, and I have been trained by typical neocon rhetoric to recoil defensively when this topic approaches. The free market, you might exclaim angrily. Jesus wasn't a communist. I agree, he wasn't. But the conflation of the free market and capitalism is a long-standing issue I'm still rectifying within my own perspective. Let's make a tangent. I've been reading Ferdinand Brodel's European History Master Course Civilization and Capitalism 15th to 18th Century, which draws a distinction between free market forces and capitalism. Admittedly, I haven't finished it yet, but I'm a good part of the way through. You can think of the free market as being a small order community of tradesmen who exchange wares on the local level. Not purely in systems as simple as the bartering system, but in isolated currency systems as well. This limited scope allows agents within it to react to market pressures more readily, and the impacts remain closer to what individual actors can manage. Capitalism, on the other hand, refers to larger networks that emerge from conglomerates of free market systems across wider differences. Merchants of higher orders begin interacting within multiple enclosed systems to translate wealth across social and physical boundaries to accumulate them within portions of the larger network. The free markets, plural, still exist underneath, but individual communities are now more beholden to the will of national and even higher international forces that influence their lives on an accelerated timescale. I know I'm not nearly explaining it well enough, but if I could be so stupid as to make an assertion of my thoughts on it all, it's that capitalism should be regarded as an auxiliary system to the free market. You can have the latter without the former. A capitalist system can grow out of scale to overwhelm the free markets that support it, ultimately harming the laymen which underpin the free market and which enable any growth at all. It becomes its own entity of sorts, which is why a system made up of people can select for decisions which negatively impact the people that comprise it, despite their ongoing resentment. This deserves an entire video onto itself, but I needed to clarify my stance, or at least part of it, so that you know, when I criticize capitalism, I'm acknowledging and criticizing a complex collection of meta-level behaviors that rely on the free market to enable their own unsustainable growth. Anyways, Fortuna appears to be a representation of luck and fate, representing how the narrator is still toiling with the system of men to chase worldly delights that ultimately aren't distributed by hard work or moral reward, but by chance. The old adage comes to mind that Americans think they are all temporarily disgraced millionaires. I myself am guilty of this as well. I spent $30 on scratch-off tickets a couple weeks back and only got $17 back. I'm pissed. Within the modern system, people are incentivized to act selfishly, putting others down for any increased chance at climbing the ladder. All the while, our kinsmen suffer the consequences of our greedy choices. Ultimately, we look like stray dogs, fighting for any table scraps the plutocrats at the top happen to throw our way, or more accurately, that slip out of their hands. Supporting this is the reference to trickle-down economics, or Reaganomics, and the famous line, "let them eat cake." Both are commonly cited in criticisms of aristocratic elites, a very contentious group in the modern Christian circles. Prosperity evangelists, neocons, libertarians, and Republicans generally venerate their own elites while ineffectively chasing that bag as described. Left-leaning Christian groups condemn billionaires and advocate for socialist economic structures. Meanwhile, online alternate right-wing communities are a mixed bag, but broadly are against unrestrained capitalism, at least to the extent that it would undermine traditional values of faith, family, community, and nature. It really depends. The Eurus album, plus some details I'll discuss in the conclusion, lead me to place the Oholos closer to Group 2, though they're not evidently communists outright. They're using this language to highlight hypocrisies present within the modern mainstream, mostly American, Christian population. A group not really conserving anything but their own wealth and the GDP. This group has been accused of worshipping the dollar as their true god, rather than being subservient to Christ. I'll stand by that assessment as well, but I have concerns that we disagree on what to do about it. As Eurus ends, the music smoothly transitions into a convocation of fauns. A faun vocation, if you will. The title references the faun, a species of goatmen, and the Roman counterpart to the satyr. Notably, Pan was a satyr, and we mentioned his home Arcadia in the song Grow. Fauns, similar to their master, are representative of rustic places, freedom, and a love of music. A convocation of them would be a musical gathering in a land seldom touched by man, emanating a spirit long abandoned by the type of mainstream Christians I've discussed thus far. It's a fun little tune, ending with another smooth transition into hieroglyphics.
Stamping your heels along with the drum, praying the serpents underneath one of them like there's some villain left to defeat. Instead of a dance with rhythm and beat.
Our theme of the ills of modern Christianity continues here, where the drums of prejudice and fear-mongering are shown to be motivating people to try and stamp out an evil that isn't there, namely the devil, who appears to be a serpent in many depictions. To the Oholos, Satan is a defeated enemy, a non-issue, and rather than pursue him or try to root him out, we should just vibe along with the dance of life. Which sounds nice, almost like partying with a bunch of fawns, but I don't agree with that kind of thinking. IMO, the devil is still very real, very active, and very dangerous. Passively enjoying leisure while ignoring his evil works and the sinful behavior that he promotes is kind of a major factor in the decline of the American Republic and the larger Western church body, Catholic or otherwise. Attitudes of live and let live don't hold up, because Satan won't truly be cast down until the last days as seen in Revelation, and guess what? That's probably not here yet. Not to say that the Oholos are implying a lack of hardship in this non-fearful life, but it's misrepresentation to say that the devil is fully defeated, if that is what they're trying to say.
You've been too busy thinking ahead, we're all going after we're dead. So maybe consider our bodies over more than the dust that we can return to the ground again. We turn that whole wheel round again.
These next lines accuse Chris, and the modern church by extension, of putting too much focus on the afterlife over our lives on earth. Doing so has led them to ignore where their pursuit of heaven causes worldly pain to others. Whether or not we go to heaven or hell ultimately does matter, but ignoring the conditions we create for our worldly bodies and our brothers and sisters is not conducive to the Christian cause. Preventable suffering on earth isn't rendered null just because this isn't our final home. Now, there's two different attitudes implied by these lines. The former aligns with the prior sentiments of the Anemoi series. Selfish materialism and blindness to suffering create a special kind of hell where we aren't fulfilling the word of the Lord. I was just talking about that. But there's a second attitude that's gotten a lot more discussion in the last few years. That of, we don't win down here. It's mostly separate from the former. Christians in positions of power see that the world is getting worse and acknowledge so. But instead of motivating their flock to resist these social movements in any meaningful way, they throw up their arms, say, this all doesn't matter, and willfully submit to the enemies of Christ. They take turn the other cheek to mean, please, please, here, harm my wife and children, violate my family and all that I hold valuable. I'm not allowed to fight back. Which I think is false. The Bible is full of rebellions against the cruelty of mobs and tyrants and capital G godless heathens. When it's said that the meek will inherit the earth, meek doesn't mean cowardly, it means knowing when to wield your sword. This second criticism of modern mainstream Christendom probably wasn't intended with these lyrics, but the wording coincidentally refers to it as well. Christ is King of heaven and earth. Act like it. But for now, we'll continue reading through the first interpretation, which I also agree with. This mention of celestial hieroglyphs is a reference to constellations. Stars can be thought of as balls of cosmic dust or star stuff, and they are illuminated in the fusion reactions that fuel them. With the way we've established the sun, which is a star, as the symbol of God, the Ohalos draw a comparison between stars as luminous sacred bodies formed from simple dust, and our own nature, as Adam himself is said to have been formed from dust. If the heavens can simultaneously be formed from worldly matter, but also represent the heavens, then we who are also made from dust can embody holiness too. This continues with lines discussing the line of ocean and shore, as this refers to the distinction between man and nature. The narrator has seen the tumbling tide and gradient waves that blur this line, and concluded that the separation isn't concrete. The day-night cycle is used as a metaphor because it's a slow, shifting process without distinct sages. We're all connected as God's creation, be it to the ocean or the stars or to each other. In the end, we'll all be united, and God will crush the cycle of violence himself.
Like Caroline bells, the house of Augustus rings, with the echoing hymn of my fellow Passerine. They took to it like a fox to a burrow, like an eagle to an eyrie. And my God, it's getting hard to even hum a single thing.
Before we get too far, Passerine is like a total banger, right? Like, it has no right to go this hard. The visceral language used, and the plucky instrumentation with the thumping drums and gradual builds and tensions and layerings, it's great, I love it. The final song of Eurus returns to introspection by our original narrator, Chris, reflecting on their relationship with their fellow Christians. As Christians are often referred to as a flock of sheep, This song uses the metaphor of a different kind of flock: songbirds, or the Passerine avian family. The House of Augustus is a stand-in for the Western Church ecosystem, but given the background of the Heaths and future verses, predominantly the American Church. Augustus Caesar was Emperor of Rome from BC 27 to AD 14, which is the period when Christ was born. He's the namesake for the month of August, which is in the fall, and the Eurus album is representative of the same season. Notos is summer, Eurus is fall, Boreas winter, and Zephyrus is spring. It was under his command that the census was taken in Roman-occupied Judea, causing Mary and Joseph to undergo a rough pilgrimage while waiting for Christ's birth. In this way, Augustus is the first Roman to directly challenge or threaten Christ, even before Herod, and even before Christ's birth. The House of Augustus is Rome, and America is often positioned as the son of Rome in a historical sense. But where Rome was founded by heathens and eventually converted to Christianity, America was founded by Christians and converted to heathenry. Our House of Augustus is positioned as opposite to the House of God, beholden to an earthly lord rather than our heavenly one. So this first verse depicts our narrator's fellow Christians singing hymns that praise American Roman ideals, and though they may be in a church and may sound like a church, emphasized by the Caroline church song bells, they're not really praising God. Matthew chapter 8 verse 20 says, "Foxes have holes and birds have their nests, but the Son of Man has nowhere to lay his head." These American Christians are not acting like Christ, taking refuge in comfortable seats of worldly power, and as a result, confusing their praise for the system as praise for God. The narrator, realizing the difference, can't find it in themselves to sing along, or even worship at all. This inability to connect with their peers is widening the distance between them. The false doctrines, by association, are distorting their ability to engage with truly holy doctrines.
'Cause you are the song that I'd always sing. You are the light that the fire would bring. But I can't shake this feeling that I was only pushing the spirit to your side again.
But the narrator can still remember when they could sing that song, when they wholeheartedly sang what they believed to be God's praises, when they thought the metaphorical fire that they were lighting would bring the same warmth and comfort that comes from God. But looking back and comparing how unlike Christ these actions were, they can't shake the feeling that they were more like the Romans who tortured him on the cross than they are like him, which must suck immensely.
My birds of a kind, and more are looking like centurions in any little Messiah. As I prune my feathers like leaves from a vine, I find that we have fewer and fewer in power.
The sentiment continues, as the narrator sees their contemporaries acting more like Roman centurions. The word Christian actually means little Christ. Taking a leaf from Grove's playbook, the language used describes how, in the process of pruning their own beliefs, the narrator finds less in common with their peers. The idiom, birds of a feather flock together, comes to mind. Chris is leaving their flock.
My palms and fingers still reek of gasoline. Don't fuel in the fire of that Greco-Roman dream. Purify the holy rock to melt the gilded seas. It'll bring me relief, no, it'll bring me nothing that.
Even though the narrator has distanced themselves, their past actions still linger like a strong odor of gasoline. It's somewhat a measure of guilt, of culpability. They helped the fire burn and were so vigorous in their worship of false idols that they stained their palms and fingers. Dirty hands are often a symbol of guilt, the individual parts of the hand identified to emphasize the extent of their involvement. But despite how passionate they were, they never found the relief that they thought this fire, this vivid expulsion of perceived sinners, would bring. The Greco-Roman dream is a stand-in for the American dream, a distorted ideal that arose from a genuine Christian lifestyle. The materialist nature of this dream is represented in lined seams of gold, gilded, opulent reminders of the narrator's guilt. Now, they seek to turn the fire onto itself, build a pyre to melt that gold leaf away from the holy rock of Christianity that lays underneath, to remove the intrusions of man from a natural foundation, an inverse of the vines in grow that poked through the thin veneer of the synthetic walls built atop them. In burning the Greco-Roman dream, they remove the elements of warfaring and extravagance instilled in Christian tradition by the empire, carryovers from days where the eventual convert of Rome still worshipped false idols. But despite everything, despite burning that facade away, they still find no relief. And the chorus repeats itself.
Or the song that I'd always sing. You were the light that the fire would bring. But I can't shake this feeling that I was only pushing the spirit to your side again and again and again. When it comes and knocking at my door, what am I to do? What am I to do? Oh Lord, when the cold wind rolls in from the north, what am I to do? What am I to do? Oh Lord.
Who is the one that knocks? Perhaps Christ. As in the parable of Matthew chapter 25, verses 14 through 30, with the master who condemned the servant who did nothing productive with what they were given, the narrator is afraid that Christ, their master, will come one day and condemn them as well. They feel like they've wasted the life given to them and fall into a state of despair, unsure what they can even do now. Or perhaps it is the angel of Passover. In the Old Testament, the Hebrews under rule of the Egyptian Empire identified themselves as true believers by marking the frame of their doors with lamb's blood, ensuring safe Passover when the Lord's angel smote the firstborns of Egypt. In this way, the narrator is unsure they've sufficiently identified themselves as a true Christian, and they will be made to suffer alongside all the other non-believers of the empire when the angel comes knocking. Or perhaps it is death. The narrator has become more and more familiar with their own sins throughout these first two albums. The ultimate fear of every Christian is not that God isn't real, or that there is no afterlife. That's not anything they can worry about after they find out. No, it's separation from God if he is real. Fear of hell. Fear that we're mistaken in our understanding of God's commandments, that we're going against his will while still believing we are aligned with it. When the Reaper does arrive, it is the final test to see whether we have fulfilled our obligations correctly, if we've believed faithfully, if we were truly kind, or whatever you think qualifies us as good Christians. The cold wind that rolls in is Boreas, a choking numbness that the narrator will become all too familiar with. In some ways, this could be the shadow of death, blowing from the north to remind them of what is to come should they fail to right themselves. This is the sign that the end has arrived. Their life before their realization and inflection has now fully passed. It is time for our narrator to find out what comes next. At this point, we are halfway through our journey through the Anemoi, and we reach another period of stagnation. Opposite to the comforts of summer, winter brings with it a harsh isolation. Opposite to the childhood joys of togetherness in a world you haven't quite figured out yet, we reflect on aspects of adulthood. The loneliness of separating from that structure you knew to make your own way, now all too aware of what's happening around you. The modern world leaves so little time for your passions. Staying afloat takes so much energy that it all just feels a little numb. You can't go back, but you don't know where to go next. You can't move forward, or maybe you just don't know how. Boreas features a sleeping bear in its artwork, signifying the act of hibernation with the arrival of winter. Implicit in that symbolism is a message. Bears prepare for hibernation by building up their reserves, fortifying their persons for coming hardships so that they can outlast an empty season. If they can successfully do this, they'll come out the other side with a new hunger and zeal for life. Bears are a great sign of the north as well. After all, it is the Arctic Circle, Arctos, home of the bears, home of Ursa Major, great starry mother of the little cub, containing the guiding light of the northern star. Not unlike the star for which another set of wanderers underwent a journey to welcome a small spark of new life into the world. A kindling of sorts. Funny, for he would arrive in Bethlehem on a cold winter's night as well.
When the feeling leaves you, it moves so slow. Like the leaves change from your front pocket, you don't even feel it go. When the bitter creeps in to bite you whole, the specter unreflected, oh, it keeps you cold.
The Boreas album could take place somewhat after the events of Notos and Eurus. While those two are full of energy and destruction and rapid self-realization as the narrator quickly tried to tear everything down, Boreas covers a period afterward that is much calmer, or at least slower. There's no sudden shifts or earth-shattering moments, more of a steady decline. Like a bad hangover that results from the night before and lingers as a growing headache for weeks on end. They escaped what they needed to, yes, but in the process broke something important that they didn't quite realize at first. These lines describe a bitter feeling that seeps in to replace the ones that the narrator normally felt as a part of their former life. Acceptance, love, belonging, passion, all important for one's mental health. Spectre unreflected may refer to the Holy Spirit. Though they're no longer falsely reflecting God's will and the zealous fire seen before, they're still not truly reflecting the Holy Spirit, keeping them unfulfilled.
When you keep your limits, like virgin snow, like a blanket of white unbroken by the sword below. The sound don't carry, won't rise or fall. It damps the rock and chokes it back, the string will hold down.
Part of what is keeping them in this position is a sense of bitterness, resentment, or apathy. Like a layer of snow, it shrouds the turmoil below and keeps it frozen in place. They can't move forward because even though they physically let go of their past, they're still mentally stuck in it, trying to reconcile who they were and who they want to be. As a result, they're inactive. The snow isn't broken by anything growing through or trotting through it, and their clothes aren't dirtied from engaging in any worthwhile work. These sensations are eventually strangled by apathy, silent but unresolved. The interim instrumentals of Cold echo those of Passerine, dampening the sharpness of a shared motif to represent the more reserved person our narrator has become in the interval between these songs. It's a neat through line from one album to the next. Snow is also known for its sound-dampening qualities, with a fresh fall absorbing the noise to create the chilling ambience we associate with northern winters.
You paint your Hades with precious stone, made an heirloom to patricians and the rich alone. The Toll crossing, Auto Caron, would atrophy
Verse 3 is the author reflecting on their personal debts more clearly, stating that their prior works only glorified the worldly riches of patricians, a type of Roman noble, and not God. They're on their way to a gold-encrusted hell, and the toll paid by Charon, the ferryman of the Greek underworld, to get there will cost them significantly more because of it. More than an arm and a leg, it'll cost them their heart, which has also retained a gilding from the life before, signifying their prior devotion to worldly matters.
I'm not quite ready to turn to bone, to petrify this shred of life I'm holding on to. There's no peace to upset, that spirit's flow. This ossified philosophizing's getting old.
In the final verse, the narrator laments the state they've settled into, barely holding on to any reason to live. They feel like they're petrifying, turning to bone while they mull over old grudges and regrets. They're not at peace. Whatever peace they did have left them in those prior albums. That spirit, possibly their sense of connection to the Holy Spirit, has long left them. And existing like this is just tiring.
I don't mean to speak so collectively. I know I don't make it easy to even want to hear it. What can I say? What can I say? What can I say? 'Cause the more I recite it, the more you want to fight it, the more my language is sounded fabricated.
In an attempt to rekindle their connection to others, and furthermore to continue their penance by redeeming the modern church, the narrator begins to share their findings. However, speaking from my own experience as an orator, persuading people to change their views is difficult. After what they've been through, they need to share the truth, but the way in which they're able to present it is easily discarded. It's too vague, too collective, and their audience is so trained in their own rhetoric that hearing this conflicting information just makes them fight against it. And as this continues, the narrator becomes less sure of their own truth as well. So, they count off what they do know.
There's one thing I know, it's either the growing is slow or the cuts to the bone moving too quickly. So I'll keep having my words in my mouth, let the syllables fall out at a steady trickling. I'll be your roof caving in.
As I discussed in Cold, the narrator very clearly burnt themselves out in prior events. This is because they forced their personal development beyond natural course or a speed that they could handle. Calling back to grow, they didn't leave it alone, and were hurt for it. Realizing their mistake, they now exercise a cautious level of restraint, a slower growth for them and for the people they're trying to reach out to. They're not raising a roaring pyre, but a slower thaw. But as implied in the last line, the risk of a slow thaw is accumulation. Surpass your roof's rated snow load of apathy and the whole house may collapse.
You don't know what you don't know yet. Yeah, go on forgetting it. Don't you go on forgetting it too.
The chorus is the narrator's plea to everyone who won't listen. They were once ignorant of the truth because they didn't even know to consider other possibilities. Even once they did realize that there was more to consider, they repeatedly failed to do so. They don't want us to make the same mistake.
I don't mean to speak so intrusively. I know it don't make it easy to even want to see it. Nothing old, nothing new.
Furthering our narrator's feeling of hesitance, the beginning of verse 2 apologizes for intruding on the lives of others to spread this message. The way they deliver it is so deeply personal that it's hard to look at. But they knew that already. It's nothing new. The phrase nothing old, nothing new is incomplete. It's a riff on a classic wedding tradition. In Old England, a bride was supposed to wear something old, something new, something borrowed, something blue, and a silver sixpence in her shoe. The practice was intended to bring luck and fertility to the bride, to ensure a joyous transition into her new married life as she began creating a family and a home. For example, borrowing an article of clothing from a woman who already has children. The silver coin was a ward against jealous suitors, who, in our context, may be the sins of the narrator's past that linger around them. It may also be a reference to the coin put into the mouths of the dead in Greece, to pay Charon his toll at the crossing. This song has a habit of dancing around the word blue, the color of lapis lazuli, which we'll discuss soon. The inclusion of this reference, in combination with the lines that follow it, give the air that our narrator is speaking to someone that they love, possibly in a romantic way. In O Sleeper, we raised the possibility of such a figure existing within the old life in the mainstream church, and this verse may be their attempt to bring that partner around to their point of view.
But if there's two things I know, it's that the sky looked white and the water like wine when I first met you. But somewhere along the line, Rayleigh scattered across my eye, and I found the blue. Yeah, I found the
As I've discussed in another video I made on the Order of the Rainbow and theories of color development, it's an old misconception that the Greeks were unable to see blue. Their language just didn't have a word for the color. Water was described as wine dark, and the sky as a pale whitish tone. As the language evolved, the word blue was integrated into their lexicon. A similar case exists for the British Isles, where orange hues were described as red before the arrival of the orange fruit to England. Before this point in the song, the Oholos have avoided using the word blue, but when they finally do, it's emphasized as this big aha moment. Like they actually couldn't see something as obvious as the color blue. Rayleigh scattering is the phenomenon responsible for why the sky is blue. The sun generates whitish light containing many different colored wavelengths, but as the beams enter the atmosphere, those different wavelengths scatter upon hitting air particles. Rayleigh scattering colors the sky blue because the longer, larger blue-violet wavelengths are more frequently scattering in contact with air particles, particles which are much smaller in proportion to the blue wavelengths than those of red or warm hues. By invoking Rayleigh, the Oholos call upon the idea of an aspect of nature only being revealed when a very small thing is exposed to a force magnitudes larger than itself. That is the Christian experience. When we put all of this together, we might get a scenario like this. The narrator is finally trying again to convince their partner, or former partner, or maybe one that is falling away from them, of the truth of what they've found. It's knowledge that is so hard to put into language, so intrusive and long-reaching that the only way they can phrase it is to put it into prose. It reads like a love poem. The sky was white and the water like wine when I first met you. But despite their fondness of how they remember that time, they can only look back with teal-tinted glasses. They're trying desperately to convey that there is something more to see, and they want them to see it too. As a person who has been in relationships with people who have lost their faith or never had much to begin with, I can relate. Especially because I was there too. I've lost that faith before. But through events I can't fully enumerate, I found my way back. It sounds so obvious to say out loud, but you don't know what you don't know yet.
I must have found a new comb in my eye. What other lapis lazuli was hiding behind my colorblindness? What did I miss? What did I miss? What did I miss?
But we move back to the narrator's introspection. The way we see color is through the cones in the back of our eyes. little structures which absorb a particular wavelength of light, with one being entirely devoted to the detection of blue. For the narrator to have found a new cone, they would have been missing one of three, entirely reframing their view of the world without it. They were missing a part of themselves they never knew to miss. So upon the revelation that they were missing all of this blue, they can only ask over and over, what else did I miss? But why blue? In Constellations, we mentioned the indigo Ishtar Gate in the context of falsely reflected faith. The monument that the men of that time had built to their own achievements was colored in a brilliant hue by the inlaid sets of lapis lazuli, the title of this song. A rock that varies in shades of indigo and blue, but if you ask anyone, they'll say it's a blue rock. Indigo is antiquated. It's a near obsolete term in our common vocabulary. So why did they call it indigo? Because at that point in the anthology, they couldn't see that it was blue. Inadvertent, perhaps, but still a brilliant bit of consistency throughout these albums. The next song, Rose, is a reflection on the inescapable costs of practicing a Christian lifestyle, but also how the consequences of falling away from it are ultimately even more.
Wars are racing for her, crusades to adore her. The light, if you're afterward, are you losing her true nature when you loosen nomenclature? When you gift another moniker?
John chapter 1 verse 1 says, "In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God." God's omnipotence is invoked in such comparisons as this, for his commands manifest in the universe writ large. His word is law. When he speaks, the light of creation flows forth, and all his creatures rejoice in his presence. Christians spend their lives preparing to be in that presence and glorify his word. But as we've discussed, in some cases, misguided word can become violent. Wars and crusades to adore him, to spread the word of the Lord. But language is a malleable tool. It writhes and shifts like a snake in our hands and can be molded to escape reality. Any game of telephone long enough will see the original meaning lost. So when we discuss the Lord existing in our world as the Word, the representations of his ideals can also become twisted. When you remove yourself from the primary context of his command with layers and layers of associations, of clever acts of semantics, what won't we use God to justify? But fortunately, if you peel back those layers, the original verse remains unaltered, just waiting to be read.
What's true is like a sickle, it'll cut you to the middle. Your rose is without a thorn.
In another case of representing God as an article of nature, he is shown here as a rose. When you cut through the deceptive layers of linguistic justifications, you'll find that God's love has no thorns. There's, allegedly, no violence needed to exercise his teachings. However, learning this truth also cuts through layers of excuses you've built around yourself, to the middle of your person, which is painful to accept.
But no, my mouth don't taste the metal, from the pot here to the kettle. I think we got a lot we gotta learn.
Still, revealing this truth won't kill you. It won't put your own metallic blood into your mouth. The Oholos twist this to lead into another idiom, that of the pot calling the kettle black. This phrase is about hypocrisy, accusing someone of behavior that you yourself are very clearly guilty of. It's a tenet of most Christian denominations that we are all guilty of sin in some capacity, because original sin is universal to mankind. So, from that perspective, it's hypocritical to persecute someone for being a sinner, because you are one too. Everyone sins, and earthly laws of punishment need to take that into account. The hidden asterisk that I need to interject here has to do with the severity of sin and remorsefulness. It's two very different things to flog and hang a remorseless murderer compared to someone who steals a pen. Two different sins. Obviously, we have scales of minor and mortal sins, some of which are worse than others. Some other metric is necessary to determine whether or how severe of a punishment is needed, like, say, the level of harm caused to others. Now, that's not perfect. On some level, all sin is harmful to at least the self, which harms others by proxy. But the point is, he who is without sin should cast the first stone. Don't needlessly berate and isolate others for having committed sins you yourself are guilty of. But also, balance that against other biblical calls to root out sin and encourage godly order. We've all got a lot to learn on our journeys to healthy Christian lifestyles. Entry into heaven isn't earned by destroying non-believers, but through faith in Christ alone. Or something like that. It's a complicated topic.
And even though by any other name, her sin would linger sweetly all the same. Call it briar long enough and you'll tangle up the true and the fair.
The title of this song and the first chorus are a Shakespeare reference from Romeo and Juliet. A rose by any other name would smell just as sweet. They're saying that no matter how you describe the rose, God's love, the true scent or essence of it will remain unaltered. Nothing of what we ascribe to it can be changed by its nature, but the words we use to convey it do affect how we view it. Your choice of language in describing the Lord and his works could confuse your understanding of it, just like if you referred to a rose bush as a bunch of briars. When investigating the original context of this line within Romeo and Juliet, Romeo says it while arguing for their love's validity. His status as a Montague and hers as a Capulet means nothing. They each are the person the other loves, regardless of family names and their attachments. This further supports the meaning within this song, that no matter what earthly divisions have been drawn by men, love unites us.
Your dowry and fooling, the pirate is showing through. It won't buy you that empty tomb. And now how can make incantation for a counterfeit salvation? Give me peace, your Leviathan groom.
Verse 2 concerns the offerings we make to enter heaven. The church is described as a bride to Christ, so if you deviate away from him, you could be said to marry the devil instead. A dowry is an initial gift given by the family of the bride to her groom. We could see ourselves as the family of the church, which leaves our dowry to the offerings we make to Christ to justify that marriage. Of course, offerings of gold mean nothing to him. They may as well be pyrite, for it holds the same value. This is likely another dig towards prosperity gospel. You can't purchase eternal life by giving money to the church or building flashy megalithic chapels using fool's gold, hence the empty tomb. Alchemic incantations to transmute it into real value will fail, and you can't attain salvation through riches of the caliphate, or worldly kingdom. Attempts to do so serve more as a dowry to the devil, whose wants are insatiable, and whose serpentine form is sometimes interpreted as also being the Leviathan, the false lord of the earth.
No love will get you slaughtered like a ram at the altar. What is safe ain't the same as what is good. So lay compress to the aching of your body made for breaking. Oh, we got a lot of breaking left to do.
Where prosperity gospel fails to realize a Christian lifestyle by encouraging the accruement of wealth, the Oholos emphasize a sacrificial element of faithful living. In emulating Christ, the Lamb of God, who was sacrificed to take up the sins of the world, we find ourselves foregoing worldly comforts. We may even be targeted and persecuted by others for pursuing righteousness. Living kindly will rarely earn you riches and acclaim. Instead, this lifestyle can cause some temporary pains associated with poverty or modest living. The most you can do is treat your ailments, compressing those aches and pains. A little bit of suffering is part of the intended experience, and we've all got a lot more to experience. In C.S. Lewis's The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, the Jesus stand-in character of Aslan, the Lion King, is described by a beaver with the sentence, "Of course he isn't safe, but he is good." That line makes an appearance here. In translating this to an analysis of Christ, some Christians turn to some of the following interpretations. Jesus lived a countercultural, scandalous life, incurring the wrath of his enemies. Jesus may call us to do dangerous things for his sake. Jesus is a danger to his enemies. Jesus tends to disrupt our lives. Jesus doesn't make our lives comfortable or predictable. These poetic interpretations of Lewis's description of Jesus as unsafe hold some merit, but are perhaps insufficient for the context Aslan is presented in. Be warned, I've not read Lewis's work. A sin, I know. Most of my understanding is coming from a WordPress article by Dr. John Duritz, which I'll link below. He seems convincing enough and goes into further detail than I do here. I believe any of the above interpretations are more fitting of the scripture, and likely what the Oh Hellos were intending to get across. However, the character of Aslan is literally unsafe. He is a danger to anyone near him, good or evil, because he is a great and terrible power. Terrible as in inspiring terror. An embodiment of the fear of God. The same idea our narrator was troubled with in On the Mountain Tall. To quote Lewis further, Mere Christianity, 1941, "God is the only comfort. He is also the supreme terror, the thing we most need and the thing we most want to hide from. He is our only possible ally, and we have made ourselves his enemies." Some people talk as if meeting the gaze of absolute goodness would be fun. They need to think again. They are still only playing with religion. Goodness is either the great safety or the great danger, according to the way you react to it. And we have reacted in the wrong way. The Problem of Pain, 1940. Love is something more stern and splendid than mere kindness. Kindness, merely as such, does not care whether its object becomes good or bad, provided only that it escapes suffering. If God is love, he is, by definition, something more than mere kindness. He has often rebuked us and condemned us, but he has never regarded us with contempt. He has paid the intolerable compliment of loving us. What's interesting to me is the conflict between the referenced line's deeper meaning, that of the direct dangers of God's love, and the intended meaning of the song Rose, which is that God's love has no attached violence, pain, or danger, that he is a shelter. Lewis, a reluctant convert to Christianity, the sort of which deserves an entirely separate video, paints a more violent picture of God. This tangent serves as a reminder to us that the Oh Hellos, like the authors they draw from, are human interpreters of scripture and God's will, presenting stylized works of art that only attempt to convey these universal truths. Both parties are fallible, and liable to breed conflictions or blind spots. The same is true of my own delivery in this video. Where C.S. Lewis deviates in areas concerning the awesome power of God and the dangers of defying him, the Oh Hellos would highlight the Lord's desire to shelter the godly. To finish this aside, there's a few more comparisons Dr. Duritz makes. Aslan is a danger to all but a few, but God wants to be the safety and refuge of the godly. Aslan is a perpetual terror to all but a few, but God calls us believers to not be afraid of him or something else. Aslan tortures a girl to repay her for what she did, but God is merciful. He doesn't treat us as our sins deserve. This one, I feel especially, is true and a necessary thing to remember. Our sins are so grave that God would be perfectly justified in striking any of us down without warning. He is Lord of all, after all. It's only because he loves us that he allows us the chance to change, and he only condemns us in the last possible moment, after our lives are concluded. But back to the analysis.
'Cause even under any other creed, the crucifix and the hangman, they both agree. Change comes so cheaply to those of us already at the table.
If you'll dissociate with me for 1 second, isn't it odd that the primary icon of Christian faith is a method of execution? Before Christ, the crucifix was recognized only as a painful way to die. If he had been hung instead, would the noose be our symbol? An upside-down loop at the end of every rosary? A statue suspended from the ceiling of every chapel? Suffering is ingrained in our symbolism. But more relevant, the Oh Hellos are possibly drawing comparison to the tarot card of the Hanged Man. The major arcana represent the stages of a journey from ignorance to wisdom, and the Hanged Man is step 12 of 21, or 13 of 22. The stage where one willingly undertakes suffering or self-sacrifice with composure and resolve. They do so knowing it is necessary for enlightenment. Connotations of the tarot as demonic sorcery aside, this attitude is emblematic of Christ, the archetype of self-sacrifice for salvation, and a major theme of these recent songs. They at least agree on the surface. This leads to the final line, split in reference to the Last Supper and the abstract table that represents the aristocratic tier of capitalist society. Changing to be self-sufficient is easier to those already exposed to Christ and in his entourage. The apostles were willing to die like Christ because they witnessed him do it firsthand. When we ask non-Christians to undertake the sacrificial lifestyle we should aspire to, we need to understand that they are likely giving up even more than we already are to get to the same point as us. Moral: have patience with sinners when bringing them to Christ. They're understandably hesitant. Our next song before transitioning into the titular wind song of this album is another instrumental, which seems to mostly borrow motifs from Rose. It's uneventful, just a calming transition. Smoke rising like lifted hands could have a few meanings. With the narrator being burnt out, you could imagine a figurative smoke rising off of their charred form. Lifted hands could refer to throwing hands up in exasperation, a common action to indicate being overwhelmed or releasing something from our control. Lifted hands could also be raised to the sky in prayer, asking the Lord for his guidance.
With my back on the floor, cold linoleum ice and my growing pains. Watch the ceiling fan turn its shape again. My threads are coming loose. Yeah, I'm one spoon away from setting the ends of my hair on fire. If I'm kindling for a little while, at least I'd feel of use.
We return to our narrator in the middle of an ongoing identity crisis. Their spiritual growth is accompanied by physical and emotional pains, leaving them to waste away on the floor and watch the ceiling fan spin. They feel this close to completely unraveling and ending it all, but the method is key.
Maybe then my breath could embody a wildfire starting. I'd sweep up the forest floor and my body breathe life into the corners, be a darker soil.
Boreas is the first song since On the Mountain Tall to present fire in a positive context, with the line quiet as a candle. Wildfires are a necessary stage in the life cycle of a forest, clearing away accumulated brush and debris that has fallen from older trees. Established trees in low burn areas will withstand some burning at their base, while dying trees will be consumed and reduced to nurturing ash. With the choking layer of undergrowth removed, hidden seeds below the soil that escaped the blaze, or that are deposited after, can finally take root and have their turn to grow. In trying to make kindling of themselves, metaphorically, our narrator wants to be the first sparks of a wildfire that would clear away the debris from their societies or churches or communities' forest floor. They want to make way for something new and better to grow, and are willing to give themselves up to do so. But in the meantime, they're just struggling to keep up with daily life.
Making lists, folding laundry, keeping tidy with my radio show. I'd be lying bedroom keeping tidy anymore. Yeah, I swing from believing that maybe my working will all pay off to considering drinking with Molotov. I'm halfway out the door.
Boreas highlights a turning point in the narrator's archetypical Christian journey, where the self-sacrificial borders on self-destructive. Their state of disarray leaves them unsure whether things will ever get better. Sometimes, the ability to engage in mundane tasks leads them to think that they're building to a payoff, but the mess clogging their surroundings makes it hard to see any progress at all. They feel like they already have one foot in the grave, leading us back to contemplating the second chorus.
Not a lot of warmth left to go around.
The ending of Boreas takes us to the lowest point of the album, and possibly the entire anthology. The narrator truly feels like they have nothing left to give but themselves and their body as fuel to another person's developmental fire, possibly that of their speculative romantic partner. The language feels somewhat close. Where once they fought tooth and nail, or tongue and palm, to feed and then overthrow massive cyclical structures, our narrator is now grasping to create a new one. Something more personal, a cycle intended to fill others with love and not hate. They realize now the role of overarching structures, their ability to outlast a single person, to convey intention across time and space while providing a vessel for their components to continue. Will go on and on and on. Hence, the narrator's desire in the end of their life is to become a kindling of sorts, to become the initial bit of warmth needed to inspire someone else to be better than what they were. After all, in their isolated state, they don't feel that warmth from around them. How do they know that there's any more left besides what they can give? Look at the final line. To go around. It's a clear call back to those same cycles, that old wheel burnt down at the end of Hieroglyphs. That prior warmth of community, false it may have been, is long gone from them. But, of course, they're not seeing things straight. And so it's time for someone to come along and help pick up the pieces.
I'm feeling more and more, there won't be any end. No ice walls, no frozen firmament to clearly define the corners and lines of a divine invention. So paper thin, you see right through it, but I bet when you can't find an edge by a map I've written, it could feel like the end to have to keep going.
The shifts from first-person to second-person narration across all of these songs have been a bit confusing and possibly somewhat arbitrary to the needs of the musical flow, but it would seem like Glowing is another point where our narrator, Chris, is being spoken to. Possibly by that romantic partner, given the Boreas was sung by the female voice of Maggie and Glowing is led by Tyler's male voice. Yes, I know that they're siblings, the confines of artistic depiction take a little precedence over real-world relations. If you don't like that, it could also be some sort of guiding spirit, but its implied non-omnipotence dissuades me from this. Regardless, we start the end of this album with a declaration that there is no end. We don't get the closure of arriving at a final state. Ultimately, this anthology is about cycles because nothing ever stops growing and changing. Though it can sometimes feel like a blanket of ice has fallen over us, there is no great barrier that marks the end of things. At least, not in sight. The mention of a firmament calls back to Genesis chapter 1 verses 6 through 8. And God said, "Let there be a firmament in the midst of the waters, and let it divide the waters from the waters. And God made the firmament, and divided the waters which were under the firmament from the waters which were above the firmament. And it was so. And God called the firmament heaven. And the evening and the morning were the second day." God's creation of the world is something that continues in Glowing as a parallel to the rebirth of the narrator, their end paralleled by the beginning. Biblical cosmology is complex, but to our end, the Lord placed an expanse, heaven, that separated a great body of water from the rest of the world below. A massive dome that contained our everything. The philosophers of the ancient Near East believed that this was the shape of the universe, altered only by Aristotle's supposition that it was actually a sphere rather than a dome. Even when Copernicus's heliocentric model placed the sun as the crux of creation, there was still a great outer sphere of the heavens. As in the development of astronomy, where we discovered that we are not at the center of the universe, Chris now undergoes the necessary realization that they are not central to life. They're part of a cycle, of something greater, that continues past their natural lifespan and the limits of what they will ever do. Life goes on. Speaking to models of the universe, firmaments are also a staple of flat Earth theories. The great ice walls of Antarctica that separate us from the lands beyond. Agartha, Hyperborea, Lemuria, Atlantis, whatever you wish to call them. Of course, these beliefs are wholly flawed. There is no edge of the world, no corners or dividing lines between the earth and the abyss. Divine invention refers to the earth, another callback to Genesis, but also to the Bible itself. Glowing has a lyrical habit of flowing two sentences together to conflate their meanings. Corners and lines of a divine invention. A divine invention so paper thin you see right through it. This may initially seem to say that the Bible is a lie, able to be seen through. But I believe it's referencing the way in which the Bible is regarded. To the mainstream church, the Bible is a document, a set of rules to be followed or evaded, similar to the Jewish attitude towards the laws of their holy books. The attitude of removing the heavenly and treating this book as mundane is transparent. We can see this attitude is not towards the end of glorifying God, just towards abiding by a system to get a desired result. In Glowing, these perspectives are given just as much legitimacy as the flat earthers, which is none. The firmament also plays an important role in the story of Noah as well. The waters of the flood didn't come up from the depths of the earth, but instead fell from the sky. When the windows of heaven were opened, the Hebrew word for the waters above the firmament, ma'im, is used, not tehom, the waters of the deep sea. The cleansing of the earth was enacted through a lapse of heaven's walls, an absence in the continuum of the firmament. By saying that there is no firmament, Glowing presents a world where the possibility of renewal is always present. It's also implying an absence of heaven. The destruction and rebuilding of heaven and earth is central to Revelations, the final book of the Bible, or the end of days. In other words, in the end. The first words of Glowing. But the imagery of rain and severe weather is another through line from Notos and Boreas, mirroring each other as opposite points of north and south, winter and summer on the radial wheel of the seasons and winds this anthology crafts. The opening of Glowing imitates a chirping radio, like a report warning of incoming storms. It's also reminiscent of Morse code, though the clicks don't translate to anything sensible. Although perhaps it's the opposite. A report calling out for the end of severe weather, notifying us of parting clouds and the end of rough times. For now, at least. But back to our narrator and Chris. They recognize that when someone like Chris is lost, unable to orient themselves with the map given, aka the Bible, commonly referred to as a roadmap to life, it can be exhaustive to continue living. Chris wants an easy out and an end to lay them to rest. But that's not here for them yet. They started the album afraid to die, but now consign themselves to it. Instead, they're told to keep moving forward. It speaks to a feeling of aimlessness that we all hold at some point in our lives.
The inkwells of prophecy and cartography dried up long ago. They're hoarse from speaking of our study, hesitation to shoulder the weight of our bad behaving.
Verse 2 opens with a reference to the doctrine of cessationism, a belief that miracles like speaking in tongues, prophecy, and other spiritual gifts ceased to be given to Christians past the time of the apostles. It's opposed by continuationism, a doctrine held by Catholics, Methodists, Moravians, and Pentecostals, which claims miracles have continued to come forth since the apostolic age, primarily in the stories of the saints. Cessationism is more common in Baptist and Anglican sects, although Lutherans and others occupy a more cautious middle ground. In this way, the Heaths identify their background as definitely Protestant and most likely Baptist, given the demographics of Texas. Mentions that the inkwells for cartography have gone dry most likely mean that the Bible, again our basic instructions before leaving Earth, a roadmap of healthy living, is not open to further alteration or addition. It was written and finished long ago and doesn't need additional documents added to that to understand it fully. Sola Scriptura. This is consistent with Protestant doctrines as the major factor that separates them from, say, Catholic and Orthodox faiths is an emphasis of Scripture over the Church and any adjacent works that interpret the Scripture secondhand. A possible reason why the Bible has gone silent, or hoarse from speaking, is that it's already said everything it needs to. It may feel half-written at times because it was never intended to be a one-to-one instruction sheet of what to do, but rather the ultimate set of moral principles and stories of guidance. But what was it speaking to? A studied hesitation, a calculated resistance to taking responsibility for our actions and their consequences. The Oh Hellos identify the extraneous writings put forth by church bodies to reinterpret the Word of God as slick attempts to sidestep taking accountability and claim infallibility under God.
'Cause when Atlas shrugs, whose back is breaking, and I know how it feels to the hands, heavy as the heavens, a weight that could fold you to keep holding.
Throwing in another Greek reference, we call upon Atlas, the Titan sentenced for his sins to hold up the sky from the earth. This mirrors the prior mentions of a firmament, except Atlas, a possible stand-in for us humans, takes the place of the firmament in holding back the weight of the sky/waters. If Atlas were to shrug, to let his charge fall to the wayside, who would really suffer but us and those around us? So, we must continue to bear our burdens, take accountability, and take up our crosses, lest we let the world fall into disarray. The narrator tells Chris that they know this is a heavy weight to hold, in fact, as heavy as the heavens, and it feels as if you will break under its pressure. It's liable that the line, "When Atlas shrugs," is a reference to the 1957 Rand novel Atlas Shrugged. The book is highly regarded by neocon and libertarian intellectuals, discussing ideas of big government incompetence and the eternal burden of the working entrepreneur. In the book, private businesses are burdened by government moochers through laws and regulations, with their owners/creators played as the victims of federal predation. With a coordinated national strike, they finally cast off their shackles and stop holding up the world, able to build a new capitalist society after the collapse of the dictatorship. Ayn Rand wrote the book to convey her own personal philosophy, and has had significant ramifications on conservative thought ever since. While Atlas Shrugged positions government as the party suffering most from an abandonment of responsibility, the Oh Hellos would posit instead that the primary victim is the citizenry. Everyone suffers when you give up your work. This is a drastic oversimplification of the novel and its impacts, which also deserve their own video. But again, we return to the central conflict of the anthology. The interim between verses 2 and 3 is a building tension, conveying the overwhelming weight of the world upon Chris's shoulders. Just when that pressure reaches a crescendo, when they've almost folded, something changes. They stand. Against all the crushing weight of the world, their sins, and all they've endured, they stand. And they do so on their own, with a strength that was inside of them all along, a strength given to them by Christ. At long last, they've learned to take up their burden without destroying themselves. In doing so, they complete the arc established in Grow, standing like a young, curious child that's tugging at the houseplants. Their appreciation of the world has returned, weathered, less innocent and naive, but just as kind. The phrasing here is important. Honest and truly is delivered like a reassurance that Chris will certainly be able to stand, but it's also reassurance that they'll do it on their own. The cadence leading into the next line is delivered like a promise being made, that honest and truly you'll rise. But not just rise like the land being called upon by God himself in the verses of Genesis, made to do so by divine order, because despite all you feel you have lost, God still has a plan and a use for you. You may not understand it at first. It may sound irrational, like a strange commandment, but it's the task meant for you and you alone, and one day it will make sense. Glowing presents the act of taking up our cross like being the moon in full reflection. The full moon appears in the lunar cycle, another cycle of many, when the moon is positioned to most reflect the light of the sun towards the earth. Given our established connotation of the sun as a stand-in for God, it presents a moment where we most fully reflect his light and love onto the world around us. The words of this song's narrator imply that they've not felt this themselves. It's only a guess, but they associate such a feeling with a kind of rebirth. The fact that they haven't experienced this rebirth is a point towards them being that same romantic partner, finally convinced of Chris's words by their actions, ready to go down this journey with them. In this moment, Chris, our vessel for this journey, has finally died and been reborn. Their old self is truly gone, and remade into a person that glorifies God. After all, what's more Christ-like than coming back from the dead? The reason they couldn't see this glow, couldn't see their own progress, is that there was no one around them to reflect their own light back to them. They couldn't see the slow glow of their own growing soul. But now, they do. They're not alone. And they've never really been alone. The snow parts, and the sun is shining through the clouds once again. At last, we enter the final album of the anthology, Zephyrus, the western wind of spring and rebirth. What? Did you think that our narrator's journey was over? Of course not. The point of Boreas was that there is no end, or at least no end that isn't also a beginning. As the wheel keeps turning, we enter another period of growth, this time interpersonal rather than purely personal. Themes of family and parenthood, legacy and succession, and the work we pass down from one person to the next. However, there's fresh pollen to wade through yet, and some listeners may find it quite inflammatory. The following section will get political, so here's your chance to turn off or skip ahead if you've enjoyed my commentary up until now. I mean it. You don't have to ruin these things for yourself.
Somewhere down south of here, there's a woman with an armload of grass, weaving a basket that'll float the Rio Grande. She'll send her baby on it, the river running wild and fast to curry the favor of whatever pharaoh owns the land.
The name of this song, Rio Grande, is an obvious reference to the ongoing immigration crisis at the American-Mexican border, a border mainly defined by the Rio Grande River. The first verse appears to depict a migrant woman preparing to send her baby across the border, juxtaposed against the story of Moses. Just as Jochebed, the mother of Moses, sent him down the great river, Rio Grande, of the Euphrates to escape death at the hand of her Egyptian masters, this migrant woman sends her child away from the general disaster that is Central and Southern America. No, I won't apologize for that. That's a generally accurate appraisal for the situation down there, or else their citizens wouldn't leave and come here in droves the size of entire states. While on the surface, a comparison of an immigrant child to the journey of baby Moses may seem like cutting political commentary. I find the minutiae of the metaphor to really tear itself apart. Context is important. The Pharaoh of Egypt had decreed that baby Hebrew boys from their indentured caste be killed to avoid a population crisis. Out of desperation, Jochebed sends Moses down the Euphrates to escape certain death for the slim possibility of survival. He survived and became a prophet thanks to God's will and the kindness of the Egyptian princess who found him. Jochebed had literally no better option to ensure her child's survival than by risking his life. On the other hand, let's examine the situation of a typical migrant mother crossing the Rio Grande. There are a million reasons why they might do so, but I can't cover everything, so we have to rely on generalizations and patterns of behavior commonly seen in Mexican-American migrants. If they are being forced from their home by violence, gangs, and cartel activity, they have a legitimate reason to seek asylum in any other nation. And in an ideal system, they could do that at a border crossing site. Paperwork, legal means, going through all of that. Discussions on how to fix that system are a separate but entangled matter, but nations are real and borders matter. Sovereignty is something that citizens have a natural right to. Illegally crossing the river represents an undue risk for her and her child. They have other options, or at least they should. Those options may take time, but ultimately are safer for them. However, consider if she isn't fleeing certain danger and is instead attempting to give her child, quote-unquote, a better life in the States. I find this to be a significantly more common occurrence. In this case, she is acting irresponsibly. She has no entitlement to live in the United States specifically, and is risking her child's life and her own, and breaking the law, to take advantage of a foreign economic zone she has no legal claim to. Whether or not you agree with me, that's a very different circumstance from that of Jochebed. The migrant has the choice of staying and improving their life by fighting against or reforming their home's corrupt systems, which I'm not saying is easy, but is certainly more beneficial for their family, community, and nation in the long term. America underwent the process of self-selection and self-improvement in the past, and through violent struggle, we made our own destiny on a new continent. These migrants are running to an established society that offers benefits to the least fortunate people among us. Jochebed had no such option. And who is Egypt to the migrant? Jochebed was sending Moses to escape Egyptian wrath, but Rio Grande paints America, the place the child is supposed to escape to, as Egypt. Egypt was killing babies in the indentured castes as a measure of population control. But migrants are now the only contributors to population increase in the United States, while the native population has been shrinking. That's completely incongruent messaging. The song will imply through this and later actions that we American Christians are supposed to empathize with these foreigners because that's the kind Christian thing to do, but completely skips over the harm these migrant populations bring to themselves by abandoning their homes and making a treacherous journey through the desert to a land that was never promised to them. Not to mention the net economic and cultural costs to the host population supporting an infinite number of migrants, who, by the way, are an economic burden, don't get it twisted. So yeah, Rio Grande is a bit of a tough pill to swallow because every time I listen to it, I'm reminded of just how much this allegory fails to deliver its message. But while we're on the topic, I'd like to address the Donald-sized Trump in the room. The line about whatever pharaoh owns the land is important because Zephyrus was released on October 16th, 2020, a little less than a month before the controversial 2020 presidential election. Most of you are watching this video with that year in living memory, so I don't need to explain how it was uncertain which pharaoh would own America, and by extension, which border policies would remain to affect immigrants. If you think I'm stretching to make that comparison, no, I'm not. I'd like to take a sidebar to discuss the origins of the Anemoi anthology and its direct relation to the American political landscape. Following the release of Dear Wormwood in 2015, the Heath siblings aimed to create a series of albums with lighter sounds and less emotional weight. Dear Wormwood dealt heavily with the life and death of Christ and our relationship with sin as Christians, so I don't blame them for wanting to get a bit of a palate cleanse. However, the 2016 election, where Donald Trump himself took the White House by storm, sort of threw off the direction of the nearly complete album Maggie and Tyler had been working on. Seeing a surge of what we'll call zeal in the American Christian right, the bedrock of the Oholos' religious foundations were shaken. The two felt obligated to use their platform to speak to a moment where they saw immense division, and to help others who were already questioning the tenets of their faith. To open a conversation about changing beliefs, their anthology about the seasons morphed into one about the Greek winds of change, giving us the Anemoi. Ultimately, the album they were working on was reshaped into what would become Notos, released in November of 2017. Eurus would follow soon after in February of 2018, further questioning a fractured Christian identity. But the American political landscape reached a fever pitch with the midterm elections and new scandals like Trump's 2019 impeachment. Out of a crisis of conscience, they delayed the release of Boreas to further reflect on their emotions and maintain the honesty and integrity of the project. But then the pandemic hit, meaning billions of people around the world were grappling with a level of isolation hereunto unfelt in living memory. Seeing this as the perfect time to re-enter the conversation, the Oholos released Boreas on August 21st, 2020, an album centered around feelings of loneliness, isolation from the world before, and learning to live with a new normal. October rolled around soon after, bringing the release of Zephyrus just barely before Election Day. Amazing that they managed to release 4 albums about seasons of the year and not a single one of them was released in the season that they represented. So if you were under the impression that up until now I was reading a theo-geo-socio-political perspective into a bunch of fun songs about the weather and personal growth, I regret to inform you that the genesis of this anthology was in direct reaction to the first Trump administration. If you enjoy these albums, you must acknowledge that he is the defining reason why they exist. Listen, I was raised in a conservative household, and I hold a spectrum of beliefs that widely align with agrarian populism, but I don't want to pigeonhole myself. You can imagine the conflict I felt upon learning this information about these albums. Now, this sensation is not entirely unique to me, and even unique to my interaction with the Oholos. I'm used to creators I enjoy being staunchly and openly opposed to my political views and cultural values. The McElroy brothers, Wizards of the Coast, Bungie, Tally Hall, Paleo YouTube, the board game community, and many, many more. But this was different for two reasons. One, the quality of the music the Oholos produce is simply leagues and above most other things I have come across. It is simply excellent in composition and hits a sweet spot for me very few artists do. Two, where things like the Adventure Zone elevate my appreciation of improv, music integration, and storytelling, or where Magic the Gathering deepened my understanding of game design, what the Oholos spoke to was profoundly more personal. My relationship with faith, the nature of Christian living. Unlike the others, this wasn't just a niche interest that brought me joy to learn about and engage with. It was, but this concerned the foundation of my own moral value structure that informs who I am and what I ought to do with my life. That's not something I can choose to drop and ignore when it reaches a greater level of conflict. At least, not if I want to maintain the integrity of my belief structures or go about solving the problems that ail me. Truth be told, the Oholos were successful in getting me to ask exactly where my ideas came from. 2019 to 2021 was right about the time where I started taking my faith as a Catholic more seriously. The pandemic vastly restructured how the American Forensics Association went about hosting tournaments, which meant for the first time in 2 years of attending college, I didn't have to miss Sunday Mass on behalf of my activities. I started attending more often, I prayed more, I processed the gospel readings and homilies, and I sought out answers to why things were the way they are. Sorry, cat. What? What, kitty? I felt myself undergoing a personal transformation from faith ambivalent to faith active. But even though this music was an inciting factor of that growth, where it took me felt very different from the idealized Christianity the Oholos depicted. I still hold most of my old political beliefs, but if anything, this process has made me less live and let live. I'm a Christian nationalist. I believe God is real, and enforcing his morality through the law is the right thing to do. I don't viciously hate Trump, but my support for him isn't fanatical cult of personality that some might expect from a MAGA cap wearing neocon. In the current moment, he seems to be the most potent vector, or the only vector, for people like me to actualize our beliefs in the political realm. Everyone else just seems that much more antagonistic to our aims. He's remarkably unchristian in his lifestyle, from his divorces to his careless dishonesty to his sexual comments to his support for the state of Israel beyond any reason. He's an ugly man. If I were king of the world tomorrow, he'd be thrown out with the rest of the techno-oligarchy because I have to believe there are better people for the job. I'm way off in the weeds, but my point is that I found myself taking a third position that I was entirely unaware of and quite possibly would have been scared to take just a few years ago. And it's from this vantage point that I can appreciate the beauty of the Anemoi Anthology and the powerful messages it conveys. But at the same time, I think it misses the mark in some key areas, and I'm left wondering if they're wrong or if I still am. Now, I apologize for taking this cliff dive diversion from a lyric about basket weaving, but this is still my channel, and in a video analyzing the underlying messages of songs about faith and American politics, you should know my biases towards faith and American politics. I owe that to you. I don't know if this was the spot in the script to put this little rant, but I'll be damned if I try and transplant it from here now. If you're still willing to listen to what I'm saying, let's get back to the Rio Grande and its chorus.
A seed of an idea, like mustard greens, like newborn fingers curled and half asleep awake.
The chorus expresses the idea of fresh things coming to sprout or showing the first signs of development. Newborns and seedling greens are the result of a long growth process, but themselves will eventually show signs of their own agency, like growing or grabbing onto things. The wording is structured that if you remove the two similes, you get the seeds of an idea awake, showing how the narrator's pursuit of truth is having tangible effects. So, you remember how just a minute ago I was saying how it's hard for me to enjoy listening to the Rio Grande? Yeah, that's only the beginning and end of this song. The second verse is one of the hardest in the entire anthology.
From about the vineyard of swears and hallelujahs intertwined, a new wine is minted, a blend of sweet commandment. Oh, to hell with the semantics. The camel and the cable confide, the eye of the needle is tall enough to stand inside.
First, let's appreciate the wordcraft for what it is, because every time I do listen to Rio Grande, I belt this out full throttle. It's also the only time in the anthology where the Oholos swear, which is appropriate, because the narrator is said to be swearing. Second, why is there a vineyard in her mouth? Previously in Torches, we saw references to the venom on the narrator's tongue in James chapter 3 verse 8, representing harmful rumors and accusations. In Notos, there was a river bellowing out of their lungs, a tide of destruction and self-realization. Now, rather than something bitter or destructive leaving their mouth, it is filled with the sweetness and creative potential of a vineyard, of new life. Vineyards are also necessary for producing wine, and alcohol can be both a source of joy and celebration, like when receiving the Eucharist, or of pain and turmoil, like when falling into dependency and substance abuse. As an object, wine can lead to either outcome, but it is by personal choices and self-control that you receive one or the other. A vineyard is a source of both swears and hallelujahs. A vineyard is also a reference to Proverbs chapter 31, verses 16 through 17. She considers a field and buys it. Out of her earnings she plants a vineyard. She sets about her work vigorously. Her arms are strong for her tasks. This proverb focuses on ideas of forethought and hard work, of planting seeds for something that will grow, through great effort, into something worthwhile. Our narrator, sung in the female voice, sees the fruits of her labor blossoming. Where in her worldly life before she toiled in great cycles that wrought pain and suffering, that same work ethic is put to better use obeying the Lord's commandments in a fulfilling manner. But what of camels and cables? In Matthew chapter 19, verse 24, it's said that it's easier for a camel to pass through the eye of a needle than for a rich man to enter heaven. You've heard the old preacher's tale that the eye of the needle was a low or narrow gateway into Jerusalem, requiring rich passerbys to dismount and remove their baggage from their mounts, symbolizing the leaving behind of worldly goods to necessarily enter heaven. That gate, of course, is a modern fabrication. My understanding is that the original meaning preached by Christ was more along the lines of a pun. The Greek word kamelos, meaning camel, is similar to gamelos, meaning cable or thick rope, similar to the Arabic word gamla or gamlo. In fact, navigators of the age would say camel as slang for a thick cable. Where passing a rope through a needle's eye is already impossible, Jesus uses the idea of a camel as a humorous reference his contemporaries would understand, and as a level of hyperbole to demonstrate the futility of acquiring earthly wealth. The two translations of camel and cable are both valid, but this didn't stop biblical scholars from arguing the semantics of which translation was correct. The Oholos say to hell with both meanings. Whether gate or rope or beast of burden, the point is that it's actually really easy to enter heaven if you just abandon your material desires. If you're willing to make that sacrifice of what you own, the eye of a needle may as well be tall enough to stand inside. This disregard for semantics echoes the song Rose from the previous album, continuing the Oholos' rejection of linguistic manipulation. Following this is an extended chorus calling for these new sprouts to break through the hardest or most stubborn parts of the narrator's being to blossom into something new. Then, the ending.
A seed and I hear like mustard greens, like newborn fingers curling out the sleep, away through the thunder from underneath. Stretch up and reach through all the tinfoil idols lay crumpled on the ground in our prefab Olympus, divided by the thousand. Oh, maybe I'm naive for thinking that a mountain so stubborn can move. But if I'm a mountain moving, I think maybe you can be too.
Like I've said before, I'm not the biggest fan of this ending from a musical sense. It doesn't flow very well, IMO. We get some anti-conspiracy notions with the tinfoil comment, a reference to the worldly Olympus constructs mentioned in songs like Eurus, and finally, a request echoing New River for even the most stubborn of mountains to be moved by this new truth. I don't know, it rubs me the wrong way as something that didn't quite fit with the tone of the rest of the song, but that they wanted to jam somewhere in the album. But now we move to one of the breakout hits from Zephyrus. I'm fairly certain I saw an AMV for Theseus from the Dream SMP break at least 1.2 million views, and I'm reminded of my burning hatred for Twitch streamers and English twinks. Theseus is a song contemplating why, after everything we've been through, peace seems so close, but still eludes us. Holding on where I am able alludes to the narrator's still shaky grasp on their new condition. But at the very least, they are holding on to what they do understand. And for the moment, that seems to be enough to move forward.
At the edges of my fingers, never quite closing round it. Oh, that peace like a river always going, but never getting. Seems like maybe it's not all that much a place as it is away. Ways don't ever seem to want to stay too still too long.
The opening lines seem like a callback to Eurus, but like the wind, it slips again out of my fingers. Peace, like a river, seems to be a constantly flowing path. It is definitely moving somewhere, but from one point along its banks, there never seems to be an end, reminiscent of the ruminations in Glowing. From this understanding, the narrator contemplates that maybe peace isn't a destination, but a way of being. As we said in New River, the river takes her shape from every tempest she abides, implying that change is inevitable, and peace demands we adapt to the changing conditions of life.
Isn't that what it's all about? Slow trickling fall that sets the banks in half. Sweet melody it makes when the canyons crack. I wanna give all I got and I want nothing. I want nothing back.
The first chorus is a little vague as to what it's referring to. I haven't found any biblical references to fog or ranks that seem to match here, but it looks like vaguely poetic language supporting the second line. Like in New River, the erosion of the metaphorical river to create canyons and coasts is present, but where before the sight of mountains and landscapes, representing our belief structures, being worn away was unnerving, now it is welcomed as a sweet melody. Where before the narrator was afraid to lose what they felt was part of themselves, they're now so willing to cut these things away that they want nothing more than to give everything they have. This might also be a callback to the final verse of The Truth is a Cave from their previous album, The Deep Dark Valley. I was tired of giving more than you gave to me.
Whatever kingdom come, it probably won't come quick. No mighty clarion to announce it, no single-use heart to discard an instant, like Theseus' ship. We'll fix the busted bits till it's both nothing like ain't everything it's always been. It's a wonder we expect a thing to stay the same at all.
Verse 2 continues along this line of thinking that heaven probably isn't arriving for us anytime soon. You see, part of the conundrum of being a Christian is acknowledging that Christ will come again to destroy the world and make it anew. In the meantime, you're expected to live life with no expectation of when this will happen. Kingdom come will likely be in a far-off time, or at least we can't count on it arriving tomorrow. What this verse then seems to imply is that when an end does come, it'll be with a whisper, not a bang. You see, a clarion is a type of war trumpet, and in the Book of Revelations, we're told that great trumpeters will announce the end of days. But where the fiery and earth-breaking events of Revelations come as a huge ordeal, the Oh Hellos suggest a quieter arrival. Maybe not for the literal end of days and arrival of heaven on earth, but an arrival of a more temporary world peace. If we continue along the path set for us, we may one day wake up and find that peace has woven its way into our lives without so much as a greeting card. A slow replacement of turmoil with contentment. Like Theseus's ship, the rotten boards are replaced one at a time, until the result is something completely different from, but still in the same shape as what was there before. We'll be different, but it'll still be us. Understanding this truth, it's a wonder we ever expected what we knew before to last forever, unchanging.
Maybe that's what it's all about. Keep fixing what we know is only bound to break. What's worth saving's never worth letting go to waste. I want a man to put out God instead of throwing away.
And here's where we get to one of the most insightful points in the album. I think one of the primary conflicts between the Oh Hellos and the mainstream church is a desire to bring about heaven to earth. We know from Revelations, and a heavy asterisk on that humanity will not bring about ultimate peace. That can only occur when Christ casts down Satan in the last battle and remakes everything. So it would follow that attempts to completely cast out evil before then are fruitless. We already know we will fail, so why bother? In response to this, some people will say that we should try anyways, but in doing so, they can sometimes find themselves trying to hold the world to an impossible standard of sinlessness. The Oh Hellos suggest another route. We take the world one day at a time, finding a single broken bit and trying to make it better. We can't fix everything at once, and we can't even fix everything. So trying to do so causes more problems. Instead, we should maintain what we can and attempt to make the best life with what we have, until that final day arrives. A marathon, not a race. Things will fall apart and break down. Institutions and nations and families will give rise to greatness and fall to sin given time. Mend what you have, because if you throw it away, there's no guarantee you'll make something better. Of course, I can agree with this to an extent, but like I mentioned in the Eurus analysis section, I still believe that there is a time and place for rooting out evil with a greater degree of force. However, getting to this chorus shed light onto huge parts about why the anthology is the way it is. It was crucial in understanding where the Oh Hellos came from and reconciling the disagreements I've accumulated through experiencing it. Regardless, whether the correct route is constant repairs and upkeep or rooting out dens of sin, the work is going to be hard, and it may be painful at times.
Hey, nothing comes easy, no, nothing comes quick. It's gonna hurt like hell to become well. But if we set the ball straight and it'll fix and we'll be well. Ain't nothing comes easy, nothing comes quick. But I want for you is that you are well. I want for us this.
After the narrator's contemplation, they conclude that they're doing what they can for the moment. Despite everything, all they want is for them and the people they love to be well. And for the most part, they are. Zephyrus, the album, is one with strong themes of family and relationships. Specific to the title song are themes of motherhood. In Rio Grande, we saw elements of motherly love on display in the allegory of Moses' salvation on the river. My favorite line could be read as a reference to the pains of childbirth, which also fits the meta-context of anchor baby discussions. Zephyrus takes a closer look at the mother-child relationship. It's also possibly the strongest evidence we have for our narrator being a woman throughout the anthology. Other clues may come from weighing the context of different songs based on which sibling is singing them.
What do you find within the lines of distant suns in the systems where I come up empty? What if those painted songs of heroes or the moon Herculean pulling a half of me?
The lines of distant suns is a reference to Constellations, an important motif from the first album. Constellations were passed as records of myths and legends, telling the tales of great heroes like Orion and Hercules. To ask what we find within them is to ask what we learned upon our reflection upon the Greek mythos throughout this anthology, or, more broadly, our reflections upon grand narratives that contribute to our understanding of the world. In those systems, like the church, like society, what have you found? And if your searches came up empty of the meaning you desire, what did you find instead? The moon is also present in the night sky, and in glowing we correlated its reflective properties to be the capacity for a person to fully reflect the light of God in their daily actions. In this way, we become like Christ. Christ, who is fully God, fully human, but often misunderstood as half God, half man, a demigod, like Hercules. I'm also reminded of a line in the final verse of Hieroglyphs. Even the great celestial hieroglyphs are bodies of dust illuminated, and if the heavens can be both sacred and dust, oh baby, so can the rest of us. This verse refers also to constellations. Thus, a clever comparison is drawn between the ideas of holding ourselves as part divine through our efforts to be Christ-like, and the evaluation of legends we tell ourselves about what it is to be divine, and by extent, to be human.
Are we not threaded by the same weave of the wind, terra firma, and unparted sea? Whether by accident or fortune, you and I, we are matter, and it matters.
Whatever it does mean to be human, the Oholos highlight this fact of life. We're still here, living, breathing entities made of matter or dust or star stuff or whatever you'd like to call it. We are connected by the existential condition, and no matter what dialogues you construct about where we're going or what lies beyond the world, no matter if you think it's all meaningless probability or grand design, we still must take care of ourselves and each other. As Christians, what happens down here still matters. While in my analysis of Eurus I may have gotten a little granular in the details to extrapolate out, oh, this is what they think about this and this and this huge system, and here's how that triggers my fight response on this hot button topic. And while I stand by those words enough to include them in the video, these lines feel like they get more to the core of what the Oholos are trying to say. Our earthly lives are important, and while we should keep an eye on where we're going, we can't completely ignore our bodies in favor of nurturing our souls. There's a good balance in there, somewhere.
I wanna spin something out of nothing. Lead to gold, spring from winter, stormy from molded sky. I wanna help mother up an orchard from a seed up through sapling, brought her phoenix rise. The way they encourage one another to push high, touch the sunlight against their tender leaves. They'll be full grown before we know it. And as I breathe, so does she. We are breathing.
The last verses of Zephyrus express a clear desire for motherhood, and motherhood specifically rather than general parenthood. We've seen in Boreas and the earlier songs of the album a desire from the narrator to foster better things in the world and in the people around them, to make something beautiful or otherwise intrinsically valuable, referencing the alchemical pursuit of a method to turn lead to gold, the ecological rebirth of passing out of winter, or the inspirational stories portrayed by Constellations. In that way, humans reflect divinity also. God was so powerful as to create everything from nothing, so it's only natural for beings made in his image to desire to do the same. Mothers occupy a unique role in life as the only method for making new people, for birthing the next generation. They're responsible for nurturing life from its earliest stages, and then providing the affection and care necessary to create a healthy adult person. Comparing this to growing an orchard from a sapling and a seed displays the unique power a loving mother can hold in influencing the future. That process, for all of its growing pains, is unequivocally worth it. Every mother I know personally that I have asked has said so. There are few other actions more rewarding than shaping a malleable newborn into a respectable, kind, and strong individual, not the least for what it teaches the mother in the process. The growth of a child encourages both parties to be better, to push higher, and in Christian circles, to become closer to God. That sunlight we've often spoke of. The last line expresses sentiments indicative of pregnancy specifically, with the synchronized breathing of a mother and child representing an unrivaled spiritual and physical bond between the two. Even at this early stage, the thought that they'll one day be fully grown and on their own is a scarily near reality. I hold it firmly for myself that there are few greater purposes in life for a woman than to experience motherhood, and everything about this song seems to agree. Some women will hold that their purpose is confined to a specific career, project, or personal endeavor. But for most people, very few of those will give you so direct an outlet to alter the course of humanity's future. Fewer still will compel you to give all you have and still give magnitudes back to you. And these thoughts echo in the last lines of the song.
So let me melt down like mountain glaciers, break the bonds I've been holding on to, let them soften me, till every part that I am made of, water's deep to the roots of something greener.
After the beautiful reflection that is Zephyrus, we move into a more upbeat pair of songs. Murmuration / Reading the Augury is a playful transition with shouts of joy, some good synth, and recording session background noises like laughter that give a genuine feel. What follows sounds like the end to a Disney Channel original movie, but if it were actually good.
I've heard since I was younger that oil and water don't mix. They're polar opposites with a molecular rift you can't fix. But I swear with all your burnt bridges, you can leach what's caustic and find a rudimentary lie, some kind of miraculous bind.
From the beginning of the Notos album, there's been a recurring theme of ostracizing, alienating, or othering people who are different than us. Like oil and water, they don't mix. However, the journey through this anthology attempts to break down those, sometimes, self-imposed barriers to show common bonds between a people who seem unalike. And what's one of those few things that can bind oil to water? Soap. One end of a soap molecule is hydrophilic and attracts water. The other is hydrophobic and attracts oils, creating a method of repair for a molecular, fundamental rift between the two. Hence, soap is used as a metaphor for breaking down those barriers and at last accepting the unknown and unusual into our lives. Soap is made using lye, a compound formed from wood ash. For a character that has severed so many connections on their journey of self-discovery, Our narrator has certainly burnt enough bridges to supply some ash. The wordplay of a rudimentary lie refers to the production of this binding agent, but also to the foundational untruths of the worldview they held before.
Oh no, I think I'm not quite ready to let you circle the drain. All the things we've broken can be puzzled together again. All your sums, your pieces are enough to clean up all the messes you've made.
The song's soap focuses on affirming the narrator's growth, likely done by their prospective partner. Despite the mess the narrator made/became, they were never beyond saving. They could be, and are, still currently being put back together. They are worthy of love, by God and by the people that they love. This flips our commentary on Theseus back on the narrator, where they are the broken thing worth mending. Thus, a line that has stuck with me ever since I first heard it.
I think that you're worth keeping around. I think you're worth holding on to.
Just think about it for a minute. Really get granular in that line. I think that you're worth keeping around. I think you're worth holding on to. Normally, when you hear a heartsy affirming message like, you are not alone, or you are loved, you can kind of walk away from it like, yeah, well duh. I know that probably at least a few people in my family care about me, but if you have a healthy home life, that's kind of a given. They should care about me. That's the baseline. It doesn't reflect my social aptitude or what is probably actually bothering me. Sentiments like, you are enough, are vague and unhelpful. Enough for what? Capable enough to accomplish my goals? Most people probably aren't enough to do that. They should be getting better. The statements rarely hit the people they need to, and often don't address their core concerns. But I think this chorus is different. It's targeted, and maybe even just targeted to me specifically. It tells me, you not only have an inherent worth, but your presence is not a bother. People want to be around you. They want you to be involved in their lives, or even central in them. It doesn't oversell me. It doesn't say I'm perfect or that I meet an unknown bar of enoughness. It just says that I'm worth keeping in mind. Growing up, my father's career in the Air Force necessitated frequent moves, and as a result, I've left a lot of friends behind. But when we finally settled down, I found that I started having the opposite, but more troubling problem. My friends were leaving me behind. My high school friends became distant after graduation and then scattered across the state. Then, my online friends booted me during the pandemic while I was isolated in a village of less than 500 people working as a landscaper. Then, I lost contact with a bunch of my college classmates when I graduated again. And a year after that, the college friends I decided to form lasting relationships with decided they didn't want me around anymore, and blocked me literally overnight on almost everything. And throughout all of this, my romantic life was a series of red notifications, unreciprocated swipes, ghostings, and being broken up with. Sure, each of those situations resulted from a complex web of factors, not the least including my own personal flaws or wrongdoings, but it didn't change the fact that I felt frequently alone and unwanted by the people that I cared about. I don't say this to make you pity me, but so you understand exactly why a message like, "You're worth having in my life indefinitely," is something that resonated with me on a deeply personal level. That was the energy I wanted in my life, and it's something I started chasing after and am still chasing to an extent. For the friends that I still have, I've made a concerted effort to acknowledge my appreciation of them. I make a point to attend social events, to build relationships. My current fiancé over 3 years of dating told me repeatedly that I am her favorite person, and everything is better when I'm around. Do you know how ecstatic I am to hear that? So yeah, Soap has been at the top of my Spotify charts for 22, 23, and 24. I get the feeling that a few too many of you out there love this song for nearly exactly the same reasons. But enough about me. Let's finish the analysis.
I've heard if I were tougher, then maybe I'd make it alive. I got a tender side, I'll need a harder shell to survive. But if seeing's believing, I don't know, I've seen a thing grow without an open coat, not without a softening showing.
If we remember back to the initial warmongering attitudes in the early part of Notos, you can imagine how a society that believes in punishing heretics / non-believers / sinners would value a lack of empathy towards their opposition, and consequently a lack of empathy in general. You've got to be tough to do the tough job of hurting other people. In that situation, hiding your tender side is a necessary part of fitting in. And the narrator here seems to be reflecting on that early period of their lives. But after the events of Boreas, they/we know that opening yourself up to others is essential to growth. To improve yourself and relationship with others, you must have the awareness to let your guard down and let other people help you. The partner saw the original narrator grow by letting go of their ego/selfishness/destructive tendencies, and resultingly embodying a sacrificial will that they displayed on full. That said, the process was still painful and has left some lasting impacts.
I know, maybe you're not quite ready to loosen your hold on the safety blanket you've been keeping around your shoulders. But you're some your pieces are enough to make you whole. You gotta let it go.
It's realistic that in processes of growth, there are relapses and cycles of openness and closedness. While our narrator may have had an episode of extreme outward emotion, it's natural to sink back a little into safety and recuperate, somewhat like their inner child hiding inside of a safety blanket. However, as long as they have their support network in place, ready to see them again when they've had their time, they can eventually be coaxed out for good. You might not be quite ready, but one day you'll be confident that the pieces of who you are add up to something solid, something whole. Once again, like we heard in Notos, you've got to let go of the past, of your pain, of all of your doubts.
But we're gonna be well. I'll give you my best shot.
The last lines of Soap repeat that key affirmation in the chorus to grand instrumental applause. With that, the partner acknowledges a painful truth. They're not done yet, and it's going to hurt even a bit more at some point, but they are going to be well. There's no question of that, so he's going to tuck in and give it his best effort. And that's enough. I think that the emotion that Soap most embodies as a song is joy, and more so than any other point in the anthology. Other songs may have had upbeat instrumentals or reflected on positive moments of growth, but nowhere else is it so clearly on display that the two people in this story are just happy. At least one of them has been through hell, but now they're both well enough to sit, enjoy the moment, and express a perspective of optimism and unbridled elation. The intro track of Murmurations is bursting at the seams with that energy. They're finally happy. And God, does it feel good. But that leads us into the final song of the album, and at long last, the final song of the anthology. Fitting For a series so focused on patterns of behavior, on cycles, to end in a song called Rounds. Rounds is a more understated song, with calm instrumentals and lyrics emphasizing introspection. Contrast this against New River, Passerine, and Glowing, the ending songs of the other 3 albums, which are more punchy and vibrant. This reflects how, while those songs occur at more turbulent points in the narrator's journey, Rounds exists to let us unwind at its final end.
Am I still speaking? Yeah, I'm long in the wind. I'll go on and on and on again. If my chest don't cave in. When did I last breathe in? Am I empty again? Oh, that wind that I've been spending is a long one, my friend.
Rounds has a very heavy instrumental focus, though instruments are central to most Oh Hello songs. Its lyrics appear as occasional rambling thoughts as the narrator is broken from a sort of meditation. Am I Still Breathing comes off as if they were so deep in reflection that they must check if they've also remembered to breathe. It's like when you lose yourself in watching a movie and forget to blink. They're also just winded from talking a lot, and after finishing 27 songs before this, yeah, that makes sense. They and I both have spent a lot of wind ejecting all of our thoughts, and this final song gives an opportunity to stop, breathe back in, and recuperate. Because if they don't force themselves to stop and do so, they're just gonna keep rambling on and on until they collapse. Given this 43-page script, I know the feeling. Alternatively, you could read it as them checking in that they're still alive after everything they've been through, sort of in disbelief that they are okay. Note also, the instrumentals connecting verse 1 and 2 use sound effects from planetarium stickers on a bedroom ceiling, referencing the lines in Constellation, "I babble on until my voice is gone." I also sort of marked Constellations as the inciting incident of the story, so calling back to that at its end is appropriate. Even more so, given the other references to constellations within this album.
The sun is my witness that the prophets could pen 1,000 words for every hope I could ever begin. May their carbon given be an echoing hymn that goes on and on and on again, so long as I live.
The second verse hits us with many more callbacks too. "Be the sun as my witness" is a parody of "with God as my witness," reaffirming that metaphor of God as the sun. "Better prophets could pen" refers to the line from Glowing, where inkwells of prophecy and cartography dried long ago. They're hoarse from speaking, which also ties into notions of breathlessness in Rounds. Echoing him is ripped straight from Passerine, and on and on and on is repeated from the end of the song Boreas. These quotes all deal with the idea that the narrator is rambling. But what are they saying? The narrator is expressing a form of humility, that there are and will be people who can more clearly express God's truth than them. But even so, they ask that any chords or praises that they do start themselves are carried on, given to and echoed by those better prophets. Carbon given could refer to the carbon dioxide exhaled while speaking, but also to the carbon given by their body when they die, returning to the ground and truly giving all they have. Until the narrator is dead, they wish to nurture the new growing cycle, keeping in line with the ideas we discussed in Boreas and Zephyrus. This continues in the next line.
Round, around, around again, we start where I end.
This is an invitation. The narrator understands that they exist in cycles of change and growth, and is inviting us, or an abstract version of us, to join them in that journey, to pick up where they leave off and continue building something better. It's also a bit of meta-commentary. Will you start implementing what this anthology taught you where it ends? In this, I also find a curious parallel between this song and the very first song, On the Mountain Tall, where we started with the Lord speaking to Elijah in a whisper on the wind. Rounds comes back around to have the narrator carried in the wind and speaking in request to prophets. Two stories of people going out to rebuild faith by ordaining new speakers. Once again, our narrator embodies attributes of the divine, realizing their journey throughout the anthology. But as the song closes out, we once again feed into the themes of cycles with the last verse.
Am I still speaking? Yeah, I'm long in the wind. I'll go on and on and on again if my chest don't cave in.
The Anemoi anthology was a monster of a topic to handle, not due the least to the sheer breadth of topics it touches on, or the intertextual/interlyrical nature of the Oh Hello's songwriting style. I think that these songs are written very intelligently and very intentionally. There may be sections that were less effectively executed, or that were still searching for their placement in the broader narrative, but overall, it's a solidly constructed body of work and nothing to sneeze at. One of my favorite aspects of these songs is the vocabulary on display. Catalyzing, calefaction, passerine, nomenclature, halcyon, rele, semantics, patricians. Those aren't words I've heard used in music before, but they're dropped in with a deep understanding of how to effectively utilize them. A bold new genre of scientifically, historically, and theologically literate Christian folk rock. Mostly. My highest praise is that the music is just enjoyable to listen to. I didn't need to understand the deeper context of the lyrics for the beat to grab a hold of me in the first place. That's a tough ask for religious music, which is often more focused on the act of giving praise than constructing a memorable or even pleasant work of art. That's kind of the point. To give praise. That's what they care about. Other Christian artists do accomplish this, but I've had a harder time finding them myself. Exceptions to the rule. At the top of the video, I established 3 questions. Do the beliefs of the Oh Hellos appear to align with my own? Is their music effective in guiding people towards Christ? Is it effective in helping those who are questioning their faith in resolving their inner conflicts in a way that keeps them in the church? For question 1, I think the answer is a resounding sometimes. To be fair, it's a vague question. We seem to agree on some important stuff, or at least fall within the same ballpark. However, there are notable topics on which we divulge, likely resultant of differences in denominations or life experience. I like the idea of the church, but think that it needs some major internal outreach efforts, some goal shifts, and a cleansing in the higher-ups. The Heats seem to present a greater break from that trust in the church body as a whole. They express the idea that the American Christians are too radical and hate-mongering. I think that there are valid concerns of health and safety, sometimes aimed at the wrong people. I think that each nation should abide by its own and glorify God in ways that also maintain their integrity. They lean more towards a one earth, one people, no boundaries perspective. Why do you, the viewer, care if they agree with me? You don't need to. This video is for my sake. I really couldn't care less about your opinions. At this time, I'll put forth my final observations of the Oh Hello's political leanings from additional sources outside of the album. Just for audience context, of course. Don't go harassing them if you disagree. Their hometown of San Marcos is home to Texas State University in the greater Austin area. I have it on good word from my Texan friends that these two cities are notoriously left-leaning, so it's not a stretch to assume that that may also be true of the Heats. Reviewing the Heat's Twitter pages, they are often retweeting opinions reflecting pro-union, pro-booster shot, pro-choice, pro-immigrant, pro-CRT, anti-AI, anti-billionaire, anti-Supreme Court, anti-fossil fuel, and various other anti-attitudes, as well as supporting climate change awareness, socialized medicine, trans wellness, and increased aid to the homeless. Some of those points aren't exclusive to the left, I hold a number of them myself, but holistically it paints them as bleeding heart liberals. Let's be realistic about this. That is a proper assessment of where they lie on the political spectrum. For question 2, that's harder to answer. I think creating an engaging piece of media that has solid undertones of Christian thought is a great vessel for grabbing the attention of potential converts or the disenfranchised. The old bait and switch is going to help some inquisitive souls rediscover that joy of unity with God if said media can inspire them enough. That said, first, the audience must be open to such ideas. If your average, stubborn, rootless Zoomer comes across the media that they enjoy and then discover that it's really Christian, they're more liable to ignore that fact or drop it completely and move on to the next fixation. The fact that the Bible fandom exists is proof positive of this. What is the Bible fandom? No, they're not Christians, though certainly some of them were raised in Christian cultures. They're a group of misguided young people who treat the Bible as a book of myths and draw fan art of the prophets as if they're bad Hamilton headcanons. It truly is wretched heresy and completely expected for Zoomer behavior. But that's off topic. There's a startling number of comments and anything on YouTube or Twitter to deal with the band from the self-identified former Christians or those with religious trauma. Likely a vocal minority, but apparently the one most elevated by replies from the Heaths. This leads me to say that the music is effective in guiding people to think about Christ, but whether it compels them to go to him is more determined by their attitudes going in. That's sort of just indicative of the era we live in. The cultural divide is too large to patch with some funky folk beats. So, question 3. Is it effective in helping those who are questioning their faith in resolving their inner conflicts in a way that keeps them in the church? No, not even close. The messaging is overtly anti-church through and through. The only reason it motivated me to rejoin was because I was already immersed in other media supporting that decision. My love of these albums is despite the incongruencies with my own values. Might this music help some people to resolve their religious conflictions? It appears to be effective to some extent. But if I am to believe that Christ is king and the only true resolutions are to be found in his comfort, can I truly say that those conflicts are resolved? Or has the audience been lulled into a set of half-truths and complacencies, kicking the can down the road? I'll have the humility to say I don't have a definite answer, but the confidence to think I have a good guess. So what do I think you, the viewer, should take away from all of this? Number 1, don't meet your heroes, kids. Holding your favorite artists to your own moral standards is foolhardy, especially when you know that your moral framework is currently unpopular. It sucks, but you get used to it. 2, just because something was made by people you probably don't get along with doesn't mean it has no value to you. The exercise of making this video essay, really more of an audio essay, taught me a lot. It's a valuable skill to be able to pick apart a larger work to identify the moving parts. You'll get good at seeing where in the process your opinions diverge and maybe learn more about why. You should internalize the logic for each so that you know where your dissidents are coming from and more effectively respond. Hooray, critical thinking. 3. Religious denominations matter? Christians are not a solid group, and you can technically still be a Christian while disagreeing with another in the faith. You can also accuse them of being ideologically inconsistent or divergent from intended teachings, but they probably still love God, and you're at least a little obliged to attempt to rectify the differences. 4. Texas is the new California. I'm sorry, but it's true. Things are going to get worse before and if they get better. 5. Christ is king of heaven and earth, and anyone who says otherwise is lying. 6. Proselytizing is good, actually. Hope this helps. If you've made it all the way to the end of this video, good job. Drink some water. There's a glass on your right. If you're a Christian, let me know what your thoughts are in the comments. If you're not a Christian, consider joining us. Hell is real, and you're in danger of going there. Yada yada yada, go forth, the mass is ended. My name is Element Freak, and I approve this message.